Chapter 1259. An army was defeated like a mountain. When two armies fought, as long as their morale was still there and they were still charging forward, even the side with fewer people could still cause enough damage to the side with more people. It wasn't impossible for them to turn defeat into victory. After all, in history, there were countless instances of people winning with fewer people. However, once the morale was destroyed and they couldn't form an effective counterattack, then there was really no other way. The more people there were, the easier it was to cause chaos, and it wouldn't help the overall situation. Just like the three great battles during the liberation period, the reason why the national army was defeated was because their morale was at an all-time low. In the process of capturing captives, a squad could often capture 300 to 400 enemies, creating countless miracles. The current situation was similar to the national army fleeing in defeat. Without command, morale, and fighting spirit, the only thing the cavalry could do was to run. They didn't need to run too fast. As long as they were a little bit faster than their comrades, there would be a chance for them to escape with their lives. Everyone only cared about running away. No one thought about fighting, and no one thought about resisting. That was tantamount to putting themselves to death. Only those who ran faster than them would benefit. With such a thought, those who could escape fled with all their might. Those who were slow simply threw away their weapons and knelt down to surrender. They had heard that on the battlefield, under normal circumstances, the 5-star army wouldn't kill any captives. After a series of attacks, only less than 3,000 of the 10,000 elite cavalry managed to escape. Among them, the number of cavalry who gave up on escaping reached close to 5,000, far exceeding the number of the 3rd Regiment soldiers. In other words, there were only about 2,000 cavalry who were killed on the battlefield. This was the importance of morale and fighting spirit, and this was also the reason why they could win with fewer people. If these captives resisted with all their might, even if they couldn't win, they could still inflict heavy damage to the 5-star army. When people are united, Mount Tai will move. This sentence could be said by anyone, but when it came to the crucial moment, there were too few people who could do such a thing. Battalion commanders Hu and Lu, take 2 battalions with you to watch over the captives and clean up the battlefield. Collect as many crossbow bolts as you can. Hu Boer shouted to Hu He Lu, before leading the other 8 battalions to chase after the fleeing Ili Belly cavalry. According to the military plan, defeating the enemy in front of them was not their goal. Their true opponent was the 80,000 cavalrymen led by Tang Mushi. Following the defeat of the 10,000 Ili cavalry soldiers on the west side, the Ili cavalry soldiers on the east and north sides were also defeated by Commander Lu Duo of the 2nd Regiment and Commander Gong Feng of the 5th Regiment respectively. For a time, the battlefield was filled with scenes of the cavalry fleeing in disorder. Not far behind them, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were full of vigor and morale, were chasing after them. Within General Tang Mushi's tent, he was discussing with a few important generals on how to deal with the 5-star army. All of a sudden, scouts appeared one after another, bringing bad news. When he heard that the defensive lines on the east, west and north had been broken in just a short hour, Tang Mushi's face revealed a look of disbelief. That was 30,000 cavalrymen. Even if they were 30,000 pigs, they couldn't possibly be wiped out by the 5-star army in such a short time. He wanted to say that this was fake news, but seeing the looks of fear on the faces of the scouts, Tang Mushi had no choice but to believe it. At that moment, he broke out in cold sweat. Could it be that the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was really that strong? With 80,000 cavalrymen, they could not even suppress an enemy that was 5 times their number? Tang Mushi's thoughts were still wandering when another scout rushed into the tent, kneeling on one knee as he reported, "General, there are 5-star army cavalrymen outside the tent. They are challenging us. They even dared to come here?" At this moment, Tang Mushi's entire body was emitting a murderous aura. It was as though he had become a few decades younger. The demeanor and aura of an experienced general was completely released at this moment. Previously, because the enemy had suddenly attacked and the main general was not in the tent, the 5-star army had taken advantage of the situation and caught him off guard. However, now that he was here, the 5-star army still dared to come. Weren't they courting death? How many people did they send? Tang Mushi's expression was a little sinister as he asked with a murderous aura. Reporting to General, the enemy has about 4,000 people. Although the scout did not want to say this number, he had to report it truthfully because of his duty. 4,000. 4,000. Ha ha ha. When he heard that there were only 4,000 cavalrymen, Ting Mushi could not help but laugh out loud. He had already retired from the army and returned home to live in peace for many years. How could his army be looked down upon like this? Currently, he still had 40,000 cavalrymen in his tent. If he included Tushi's cavalrymen, it would be a total of 55,000 people. The enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen. How could they dare to provoke him? They were truly overestimating themselves. Or did they have something to rely on? At this moment, Tang Mushi fully displayed the demeanor of an experienced general. He quickly calmed down and waved his hand towards the generals in the tent. Let's go and see if this so-called 1st Cavalry Division really has 3 heads and 6 arms. Is it really invulnerable to swords and spears? The generals had been suppressing the anger in their hearts for a long time. The 5-star army's cavalrymen actually chose to attack when they were not in the camp. This made them think that the enemy was afraid of them. They believed that if they were in the camp earlier, the outcome of the battle would have been different. Now it was time to let the 5-star army know how powerful they were. Tang Mushi took the lead and the other generals walked out of the tent. They rode their horses to the outskirts of the camp. From afar, they could see the 5-star flag fluttering in the wind. Although they were still far away, those who could become generals were all veterans. How could they not see through the enemy's strength? When they saw that the 5-star army only had around 4,000 people, they were all shocked. Could it be that they didn't know that there was a huge difference in strength between the two sides? Could it be that they had really come to throw their lives away? After the shock, everyone's gaze landed on great General Tang Mushi. At this moment, Tang Mushi was emitting an indescribable anger. In his view, this was a provocation from the 5-star army. It was also a type of blasphemy. It was a type of disrespect to the cavalrymen. Since you want to die so much, I will let you know the price of doing so. Come, which general is willing to lead the troops to battle? Tang Mushi shouted in anger. This general is willing to go. A burly warrior stood up. His name was Moku and he was a famous general in the Ili army. He was also one of the young men that Tang Mushi valued the most. Good. General Moku is extremely courageous. I'll give you 5,000 cavalry. No matter what, you must eliminate the enemy in the shortest time possible. Tang Mushi's gaze landed on Moku's face. There was excitement and expectation in his eyes. Understood. Moku immediately cupped his fists in acknowledgement and went to gather the troops. The 5,000 cavalry were quickly prepared. Soon after, the war drums sounded. Moku, who had shouted the word kill, took the lead and led the 5,000 cavalry to charge towards the 5-star military formation. Tushi appeared beside General Tang Mushi at some point in time and looked over. He did not know that the Ili army's 3 defensive lines had been broken. Thus, he was curious about what the 4,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army wanted to do. Were they here to die? He envied Tang Mushi's good luck. There were actually people who took the initiative to come and die. If such a thing happened to him, how good would it be? It would be a great contribution. Tushi looked at Tang Mushi with envy. However, he quickly put away those thoughts. In his gaze, he saw the Ili army cavalrymen fall from their horses as if they were under a spell. Even the brave warrior Moku only struggled for a moment before falling to the ground. After leaving behind nearly 2,000 corpses, the 5,000 cavalrymen retreated in less than an hour. From the moment they started to retreat, they did not even touch the blades of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. It's a crossbow, a crossbow. They have a weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously. One of the generals was very observant. He finally discovered the source of the problem and immediately shouted out loud. A weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously. Tang Mushi's eyes lit up when he heard that. This was definitely a good thing. Once the Ili army was equipped with such a weapon, where in the world could they not go? Who would be a match for them? He originally thought that the 5-star army was here to die. He did not expect that they would have such a weapon. Tang Mushi finally understood the whole story. Presumably, this was also the reason why the other 3 lines were broken in such a short time. The enemy has a crossbow that can shoot crossbows continuously. Tushi also heard the shout and his eyes lit up. Excitement enveloped his entire body. He was thinking that if he could snatch these crossbow bolts and present them to the king, it would definitely be a great merit. His position in the army would also rise. What a happy and glorious thing it would be. After a few breaths, he made up his mind. He must snatch these crossbow tools. Even if he could only get a third of them, it would definitely be a great merit. Old General Tang, this one is not talented and cannot bear to see the Ili army suffer losses. I am willing to lead the army forward and make a military pledge that we will not return without victory. Chapter 1260. Tushi volunteered to fight not because he thought the 5-star army was easy to bully, but because he was so captivated by the 7-star crossbow that he forgot all the dangers. How could such a small trick escape Tang Mushi's sharp eyes? How was he asking to fight? He was clearly trying to steal the credit. He was just spying on the 7-star crossbow. Since that was the case, how could he let such a good thing fall into his opponent's hands? It was true that they were allied forces now, but once the 5-star army was defeated and retreated, they would naturally still be enemies since they were all living in this place. Even if it was for the future, he could not let such a good thing fall into his hands. Cough, General Tushi. You just came from afar and haven't had a good rest. How can you fight now? Without waiting for Tang Mushi to finish, Tushi interrupted. How can we rest when dealing with the invading 5-star army? Our Turpan cavalry wants to do our part. I hope old General Tang can fulfill our wish. He even brought out the banner of the Turpan army to pressure Tang Mushi. It could be imagined that if he did not let Tushi fight, even if they won this battle, Tushi would probably complain to the 5-star army and point out his faults. Now was not the time to split. The most important thing was that the Big Dipper crossbows were indeed powerful. Someone needed to bear the risk. Seeing Tushi's firm attitude, Tang Mushi hesitated for a moment before nodding. Fine. However, according to the ratio, you can only send out 5,000 cavalrymen at most. Too many won't do. 5,000 was a little too little. Based on Tushi's intentions, it would be better if the entire army was mobilized. However, Tang Mushi had already made a concession. If he did not agree and angered Tang Mushi, he would not even have the chance to send out troops. Tang Mushi had no choice but to agree. All right, 5,000 it is. I will go back and prepare. After Tushi left, Tang Mushi took the opportunity to give orders to the other generals. After naming 3 generals and giving each of them 5,000 cavalrymen, a confident smile appeared on his face again. His 15,000 cavalrymen and Tushi's 5,000 cavalrymen made a total of 20,000 cavalrymen, 5 times the number of the enemy. Even if the enemy had a powerful killing weapon like the Big Dipper crossbow, the advantage of numbers was not for nothing. He was confident that the victory of this battle would belong to him. About half an hour later, General Tushi arrived with 5,000 cavalrymen he had personally selected. These were the elites of the 15,000 cavalrymen. He had already instructed them that killing the enemy was secondary. The most important thing was to seize the enemy's crossbow weapons. Whoever seized one would be rewarded with a great merit and would be promoted by 3 ranks and rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Opposite Ili Bailey's army was Tae Mu-er's regiment, which was personally led by Division Commander Tianhu. Tae Mu-er had just defeated 5,000 of the enemy's cavalry and killed 2,000 of them. Clearly, he was still not satisfied. At this moment, he saw that the enemy was constantly mobilizing their troops, but no one was rushing out. He said anxiously, "Master, why aren't they coming out? Are they really afraid?" "Haha, of course they are afraid, but they will also come out. We only have 4,000 cavalry. This is why they are confident that they can win. As for why they are not attacking now, it is because they are mobilizing their troops. First Regiment Commander, inform the soldiers to check their weapons. The battle is about to begin." Things were as Tianhu had guessed. After the 15,000 cavalry from Ibali and the 5,000 cavalry from Tulyafan had gathered, they opened the gates of the main camp and the 20,000 cavalry marched out. From afar, they looked very imposing. If it was any other army with only 4,000 cavalry, they would have been so scared that their legs would have turned to jelly. How could they still talk about fighting? However, when the same thing happened to the soldiers of Ibali's army, their eyes were wide open and filled with murderous intent. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the most powerful weapon in their hands, the 7-star crossbow. This was what they were relying on. So what if the enemy outnumbered them by 5-1? In a war, it was not certain who had more people. If that was the case, wouldn't the great Ming Empire already be #1 in the world? Moreover, these 4,000 cavalrymen were not alone. The other 3 regiments were also on their way. So much time had passed, and they would arrive at any moment. Once the main forces converged, they would no longer be defending, but attacking with all their might. At that time, the world's #1 cavalry division would create another miracle on the battlefield. The 20,000 cavalry of the Allied army leaped out and began to form up in front of the main camp. After all, there were too many people and the distance between the two sides was only 3 li. If they did not form up properly, they would not be able to charge out. Just like that, after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, the 20,000 cavalry formed a fan that was 10 li wide. Just like that, all 20,000 cavalry were sent out of the main camp. After the battle formation was set up, under Tang Mushi's orders, the war drums were beaten and the earth shook. Everyone, listen to my orders. In this battle, no one is allowed to retreat before the gong sounds. Otherwise, you will be punished as a traitor. Before charging out, Tang Mushi had learned his lesson from the previous incident. He shouted loudly. In his opinion, the most difficult thing to do when facing the 7-star crossbow was to get close to the enemy. Once the two sides started fighting, their advantage in numbers would be displayed to the greatest extent. At that time, victory would belong to them. On the other hand, if everyone retreated, they would never be able to get close to the enemy. They would only become live targets and would not be able to escape the fate of being shot. Only advance and not retreat. This was the order that Tang Mushi gave to the 20,000 cavalry. Then, the war drums sounded and the 20,000 cavalry launched a fierce charge on the ground that was 10 li wide. The war horses raised their hooves, kicking up countless snowflakes on the ground. At this moment, the world seemed to have turned into a vast expanse of white. It was so white that tens of meters away became a blind spot. Division Master, the enemy has finally launched an attack. Teimuer's face was filled with excitement. Pass down the order. Split into companies and spread out on the same spot. Kill any enemy that tries to get close. At the same time retreat as you fight. Don't fight head-on. Tianhu gave an order. After all, the disparity in numbers was too great. Once the enemy got close to them, it would be the 1st Cavalry Division's misfortune. Yes. Although Teimuer also wanted to fight to his heart's content with the enemy, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. There was no doubt that Tianhu's order was the most appropriate at the moment. While the enemy's line of sight was obstructed, they could change their battle formation. Pass down the order. Split into companies and get into a crossbow attack formation. Spread out quickly and retreat as you fight. Don't get close to the enemy. After Teimuer gave the order, the well-trained 4,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division immediately split into 40 small teams. The distance between each team was not far and the battle line was constantly widening. The Alliance army charging from afar did not know this. They only knew that the enemy was right in front of them. As long as they could charge through the enemy's crossbow formation and engage in close combat, victory would definitely belong to them. Therefore, at this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to charge. Under the galloping of tens of thousands of horses, the rumbling sound was incessant. It was as if an earthquake was about to happen. The rumbling sound filled the ears of every rider. At this moment, everyone seemed to have forgotten about life and death. They only charged out of instinct. The distance of only 3 miles was nothing to the cavalry. As they got closer and closer to the 5-star army's camp, the sound of crossbow arrows piercing through the air came one after another. With their line of sight obstructed, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division released their crossbows purely out of instinct. As long as they saw a moving figure rushing towards them, they would pull the trigger. The other soldiers hurriedly reloaded their crossbows when they had the time to ensure that their weapons could continuously attack and kill. Snow swirled in the air and blood splattered everywhere. There was a hint of red in the white and a hint of white in the red. This was like a painting, a ticket to hell. Amidst the snow, there were only flying crossbow arrows, flashing figures, and the urgent beating of the drums that they had to hear even if they didn't want to hear it. As they madly charged forward, they continuously retreated and released their crossbows, playing the battle song near the Ala Mountain Pass. How is it? How is it? In the Alliance Army's camp, Tushi was anxiously looking around. Unfortunately, under the heavy snow, he could not see anything. On the other hand, General Tengmuxi, who was not far from him, was obviously much calmer. He only squinted his eyes as he looked at the scene in front of him. General Tang Muxi had been on the battlefield for a long time. He had spent his entire life in blood and fire and was used to seeing big scenes. He had even commanded bigger battles before. However, he did not know why, but at this moment, he was a little flustered. Perhaps it was because he could not see the situation clearly, or perhaps it was because he was afraid and did not understand the 7-star crossbow. As the saying goes, ignorance is the scariest. This is the truth. The battle was still going on. It had already been going on for close to an hour. The army had already gone far away. Other than the heavy snow under the hoofprints, nothing else could be seen. Why does it seem like they are moving towards us? It was unknown which young general said this unintentionally. It was this sentence that attracted everyone's attention. When everyone looked carefully, they discovered that the white snowflakes were indeed moving towards them. What's going on? What's going on? It was still Tushi who was the first to shout. If one listened carefully to his voice, they would be able to feel that at this moment, he was more or less panicking. General Tang Muxi was still squinting his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a dozen breaths, when the snowflakes were less than 2 li away from their camp, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and roared, "Not good! Immediately close the camp gate! Close the camp gate!" Chapter 1261. In his nervousness, he shouted twice, but it was still the same order. Even so, the generals and soldiers at the side were still in a daze. They did not know why the old general would give such an order, and no one carried it out. "Bastard, why aren't you closing the gate? The enemy cavalry is coming." Seeing that no one was carrying out his orders, Tang Muxi became truly angry. He shouted loudly once again, "Stop it! Stop it!" Not only that, Tang Muxi personally rode his horse and rushed to the camp 100 meters away. He reached out his hand to close the wooden gate. As expected of an experienced general, Tang Muxi's observation skills were extraordinary. Things were just as he said. The snowballs that were moving over were the main forces of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Division that were approaching from afar. Just a moment ago, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd regiments had finished their respective battles and finally joined forces with the 5th regiment. After a series of crossbow bolts, the cavalry of the Ili army, which had been mostly wiped out by the 5th regiment, was finally defeated. Then, under the command of Division Commander Jianghu, they charged in the direction of the Ili Cavalry Division's camp. Due to the heavy snowfall, all the soldiers were covered in a layer of white snow, which made it the best camouflage. Even though they were very close to each other, the enemy did not raise any vigilance. If Tang Muxi had not been fighting for a lifetime and had a natural insight and judgment on the battlefield, he would not have been able to make such a judgment. Unfortunately, although he had seen through it, because of the lack of time, no one carried out his order. He might as well use his actions to prove everything. General Tang Muxi was best at defense, and this camp was run by him like an iron bucket. Once the gate was closed, even if the world's #1 army wanted to enter, they would have to pay a heavy price. Tang Muxi, who was using all his strength to push the wooden gate, suddenly froze when he heard this sound. Then, blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. An arrow came from afar and hit him in the back. Although it was not fatal, it drained a lot of his strength and injured him. Old General. The scene of Tang Muxi standing in front of the wooden door after being hit by the arrow was seen by many people. At this moment, everyone finally regained their senses and understood why the old general had given such an order. However, the best opportunity had already been missed, and it was too late to remedy it now. On the battlefield, any change could directly determine the outcome of the battle. Just like at this moment, when everyone was riding their horses towards the wooden door, a few more crossbow bolts flew through the air. When they were less than 120 steps away, almost all of the bolts hit their targets. Tang Muxi's back was like a hedgehog that was pierced by the bolts. His body twitched and stopped several times. Protect the old general. Finally, a fast general and soldier reached Tang Muxi's side. They wanted to reach out and pull out the arrow on his back, but they were stopped by Tang Muxi, who seemed to have regained consciousness before his death. "Don't worry about me. Hurry. Hurry and retreat. We cannot fight the enemy. You have to think of a way to bring more soldiers back. After exhausting the last of his strength, Tang Muxi breathed his last on the spot after saying those words. At this moment, The old general that he had painstakingly invited returned to the earth and was buried in the snow. With Tang Muxi's death, the 1st Cavalry Division also rushed to the front of the large tent. Following that, a dense rain of crossbow bolts shot and killed about 300 cavalrymen on the spot, as well as more than 20 high-ranking generals. Watching this scene from 100 meters away, Tushi's expression changed drastically. In his panic he kept shouting, hold on for me." After shouting these words, he turned and fled. He did not even care about the army, and only brought a few dozen of his personal guards to escape from the back of the camp. Tushi was not the only one who fled. Some soldiers who reacted quickly also saw that the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalrymen had already rushed into the large tent. When they saw the sky full of crossbow bolts shooting from afar, and when they saw that the cavalrymen in front of them did not even have the chance to wave their swords before they were killed by the bolts, the entire camp was in chaos. With the death of their general, the morale of the army was completely destroyed. The remaining 35,000 cavalrymen of the Alliance army fled in all directions like stray dogs. At this moment, they only hated the fact that their warhorses only had 4 legs and were running too slowly. Split up and chase. The 2nd Cavalry Division will stay behind to clean up the battlefield. Jianghu rode a tall horse into the camp. When he saw the corpses of the enemy cavalrymen who had died from the crossbow bolts, as well as the captive cavalrymen who had already knelt down and surrendered, he immediately gave the order to fight. The 2nd Cavalry Division's mission was the most important. They had paid the most to deal with the 20,000 Ili cavalrymen north of the Ala mountain pass. At this moment, they naturally had to stay behind to clean up the battlefield. In the 1st Cavalry Division, Tianhu's orders were equivalent to Yang Qindong's orders. No one dared to disobey. Immediately, other than the 1st, 3rd and 5th Cavalry Divisions that went in 3 different directions to chase after the enemy, the only ones left in the camp were the 2nd Cavalry Division soldiers, the captives, and the corpses of the Alliance army. Of course, because they had been defeated too quickly and too hastily, the Ili army's money, rations, and weapons were all left in the camp for future translocations. When the 2nd Cavalry Division's 2nd Cavalry Division's Lu Duo saw the large storehouse, he excitedly came to Tiger's Mane. "Division Commander, the money, rations, and supplies are all here. We did not lose anything. These things are enough for our division to eat for a year." "Good. Send the report of victory to the 6th young master. At the same time, ask for instructions on what to do with these spoils." Tianhu's face was filled with satisfaction. With the help of the Big Dipper crossbow, they had made a name for themselves as the #1 cavalry division in the world. From now on, whenever they mentioned their army, their enemies would be afraid of them. The heavy snow still showed no signs of stopping. The 5-star army used the heavy snow to achieve their goal of surprise attack. At the same time, many of the Alliance army's cavalrymen also used the heavy snow to escape. The heavy snow quickly covered the tracks of their fleeing horses, so the pursuit was not too smooth. Even so, when the final results were tallied, they still managed to kill more than 13,000 enemies and capture 40,000 enemies. This meant that out of the 95,000 enemies, not even half of them had escaped. Among them, more than 30,000 of the Ili army had escaped, more than 10,000 of the Turpan cavalry had escaped, and the rest were either stragglers or deserters whose whereabouts were unknown. When the telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, who was in the Turpan palace, he couldn't help but laugh. "Not bad. Tianhu didn't let me down, and the 1st Cavalry Division didn't let me down either." Reply: the 1st Cavalry Division has collectively achieved first-class merit. Order them to be on standby and wait for the rear army to take over. "Yes." Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, excitedly replied, then turned around and strode away. Yang Qindong, who was left behind, looked in the direction of the tower outside the palace and muttered in his heart, "Bullshit 5-star army, I'm fighting the Alliance army." On the tower outside the city, the siege continued. It was personally led by Hikagan, who had his nose dug out by the 5-star army. It seemed that he wanted to take revenge for the humiliation of that day. Under his organization, the momentum of the siege was very fierce. Often, when a 1,000-man team was beaten back, another 1,000-man team would take their place and charge forward. They had been fighting for half a month, and the 10,000 infantrymen in his hands had been used up. Now, the ones charging were the 5-star army, which had changed from cavalry to infantry. It seemed that everyone knew what it meant to take down Turpan City. Each country took out 5,000 soldiers, who had changed from cavalry to infantry, and handed them over to He Kagan to command. This made the siege even more fierce. Not only that, Yes Hen also used all the cannons he had obtained over the years, either by robbing or buying. They gathered them together and attacked the West Tower fiercely, as if they wanted to destroy the city. The Baiming army's cannons were naturally not as powerful as Yang Chendong's cannons, but their power was not to be underestimated. The bombardment that had been going on since yesterday had indeed caused a lot of pressure and damage to the defense of Turpan City. When Beta Persei heard the sound of the cannons, he personally went to the tower. After seeing that many of the walls had been blown open, his face was full of worry. This won't do. If this goes on, it's only a matter of time before the city falls. For the sake of the young master's safety, I have to force it. Beta Persei, who had gone down the tower, had already made up his mind. He must take Yang Chendong away from here. He believed that with nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavalry and 2,000 strong black cavalry, if they suddenly attacked at this time, there was still a high chance that they could escape. As long as the young master was fine, even if they lost Turpan City, what was the big deal? Beta Persei, who had made up his mind, first went to find General Song and the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade leader Qiu Vi and 2nd Brigade leader Dao Xiao. The four of them quickly came to a consensus and then went to the palace. When they arrived at the palace, they could not find Yang Chendong. After asking some people, they found out that Bug Nam of Gojoseon was in the back room. Let's go to the back room. After Beta Persei asked for the location, he went to the back room with everyone. When they arrived, they saw the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade Deputy Brigade Leader Ba Daojiang commanding the people to carry something out of the back room. What's going on? Beta Persei and the others still did not see Yang Chendong, and could not help but ask in confusion. Oh, the 6th young master is commanding everyone to carry the cannons outside. Huh. At this moment, Ba Daojiang's face was filled with an excited smile. At this moment, a gust of wind blew by and blew a piece of black cloth off, revealing the pitch-black 100mm mortar underneath. Chapter 1262. Artillery, it's a 100mm mortar. As the two captains of the Black Cavalry, Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao were naturally very familiar with such things. Beta Persei, the 6th young master is calling for you. Pang Yu, the captain of the 1st squad, walked through the Black Cavalry and arrived in front of Beta Persei with a trace of respect on his face. At this moment, Beta Persei was also confused. He didn't remember when there were any artillery in this warehouse, but these things really did appear. What's going on? With extreme puzzlement, Beta Persei followed behind Pang Yu and walked into the warehouse. Behind him, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, Na Ri Song and the others couldn't help but shake their heads. Second brother, what are you doing? We also have artillery, many times more advanced than the enemy. What are you nervous about? That's right, that's right. Come on, let's continue to defend the city and wait for the artillery to be ready. Let's give the enemy a good look. Ha ha ha. The three officers with the rank of senior colonel laughed and left without waiting for Beta Persei to return. At this time in the warehouse, Beta Persei was listening to Yang Chendong's teachings. Not bad, Beta Persei. This time, you and Xianxia are well prepared. You knew to bring some artillery to the city in advance. Although there are only 2, the number of shells is really enough. You guys have done a good job. When Yang Chendong saw Beta Persei appear with a confused look, he didn't wait for the other party to speak and spoke first. After saying this, Yang Chendong still didn't give Beta Persei a chance to ask questions and continued. With these 2 100mm mortars, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with the artillery outside the city. Well, I know you really want to shoot the artillery, so I'll leave this task to you. You don't have any other questions, do you? This so-called other question naturally referred to why the cannons appeared here. Beta Persei had been by Yang Chendong's side for the longest time. He didn't learn anything else, but he had picked up some intelligence. He immediately understood the meaning behind Zhang Heng's words. Although he was also very puzzled as to how these cannons appeared here, he couldn't stop the excitement of wanting to shoot them. He immediately nodded and agreed. Young master, these 2 cannons were indeed transported all the way here after I contacted Xianxia. It's just that I forgot about it because of the urgency of the war. Please punish me. No man is a saint. How can there be no mistakes? All right, I forgive you. Go and fiddle with your cannons. Remember, don't waste a single shell. Knowing that Beta Persei understood the meaning of his words, Yang Chendong chuckled and waved his hand. Beta Persei left excitedly. To him, it didn't matter how the cannons appeared here. Speaking of which, how many miracles did the sixth young master bring to him? What he was more excited and looking forward to now was the opportunity to shoot the artillery. As soon as the sound of the artillery was heard, the enemy would be dizzy. Seeing Beta Persei leave excitedly, Yang Chendong let out a sigh of relief. He had no choice but to take out 2 100mm mortars from the large warehouse. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to defend Tulyafan City. Fortunately, Beta Persei was not an outsider. Although he would have some guesses after doing this, he would never speak carelessly. Yang Chendong was still confident about this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept this person by his side for so long. With Beta Persei standing up for him, no one would doubt the origin of these cannons. He could also breathe a sigh of relief and return to the palace to take care of the formation. As for whether the appearance of the 100mm mortars would reverse the situation, Yang Chendong was not worried at all. If he couldn't defend Turpan City even after taking out such a trump card, he might as well stop the expansion and immediately return to Xianxia City to retire. Outside Turpan City, the scene of artillery fire was still raging. When they saw pieces of the city wall peeling off as the cannons fired, the generals of the Five-Nation Coalition laughed heartily. Originally, it should have been easy to take down Turpan City, which was only guarded by 20,000 cavalry. They had the advantage of military strength, plus the people in the city knew that they were coming, so they should have responded. Under internal and external troubles, Hikagan gave him 3 days at the earliest. He was confident that he would be able to take down Turpan City in 3 days at the latest. But when it came to fighting, it was completely different. At some point, many young men in civilian clothes suddenly appeared on the city gate tower. They actually raised pillows, pushed boulders, and splashed kerosene to counterattack. At first, Hikagan wanted to stop the attack. He thought that the people were forced to do so by the 5-star army. He shouted loudly, telling the people not to listen to the 5-star army. He even urged them to open the city gate from the inside and let them in. However, such shouts were quickly suppressed by the bows and arrows of the Mongolian soldiers led by Narasong. If it wasn't for the distance, one of the arrows could have hit Hikagan. This angered the other party. Hikagan loudly shouted that these people were fools. He also said that once the city was breached, he would teach these people a lesson for helping the 5-star army defend the city. This was like poking a hornet's nest. Originally, the people only worked for the sake of money, but now they had no choice but to fight for themselves. Perhaps after the city tower was breached, the people who helped to defend the city might not be exterminated. However, there was one thing that could not be changed, and that was that the money they had received would be taken back. How could they give back what they had received? Just based on this, the benefits of these people were completely tied to the 5-star army. At this moment, they had no other choice. They could only fight to the death. When they saw the enemy's cannons continuously bombarding the city gate tower, the destruction was extremely great. The skin of the city walls was peeling off, and a hole was about to be blasted open. Many of the people defending the city became nervous. Right now they were just like the 5-star army. In fact, they were even more anxious than the 5-star army. This was because once the city gate was breached, the 5-star army could still charge out. However, they would not even have the chance to escape. Thus, many of the people went to the palace together. They were prepared to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to protect the city. For this, these people were willing to do their best. On their way forward, they happened to see Young Air and the others carrying 2 pitch-black iron objects, as well as several large wooden chests, out of the city. "What are you doing?" Seeing so many people blocking the way, and most of them were young men, Beta Persei frowned slightly. With a wave of his right hand, the 500 black cavalry immediately spread out in a defensive formation. These 2 cannons and 20 boxes of ammunition were treasures in Beta Persei's eyes. He would never allow anyone to have any ideas about them. The murderous aura of the black cavalry immediately shocked the people on the opposite side. They were all at a loss for what to do, and some didn't know what to do. Fortunately, there were still some bold people in the crowd, such as the young man Tumu, who had repeatedly performed well. He wasn't so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound, but his voice wasn't very loud either. "General, what are you doing?" "Don't worry about what we're doing. Let me ask, what are you doing? You're called Tumu, right? I'll let you say it." Beta Persei still remembered this young Turpan man who had performed well on the first day, and immediately pointed to him. Now that he had a chance to speak, Tumu told the truth. "General, the city is in danger. We want to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to send troops to defend the city." Hearing that they wanted to petition to defend the city and not have any ideas about his cannons, Beta Persei's expression immediately became much better. "Oh, so that's what you mean. Okay, then you don't have to go. Didn't you ask us what we were doing just now? Then I can answer you now. Do you see what we're moving? These are cannons, specially used to help everyone defend the city." "Cannons? They're so small." Although Beta Persei's words were very confident, in the eyes of these young people, they were not very optimistic. They had seen the cannons of the Five-Nation Coalition Army on the city tower before. Each one was bigger than the other, and their power was so amazing. The two cannons in front of them were so small that two people could carry them. They really couldn't imagine how powerful they could be. At this moment, Beta Persei didn't know whether to cry or laugh at being underestimated. Okay, there's no need to explain anything to you now. Just watch our actual actions in a while. Come on, let's move on." Some things could not be described with words, just like the power of a 100mm mortar. But Beta Persei believed that once the cannons were fired, the power they emitted would definitely shock everyone. At that time, facts would be more effective than 1,000 words. Beta Persei said so confidently that the people could only follow behind him, regardless of whether they believed it or not. They soon arrived at the West City Gate, then began to set up the cannons and adjust the cannon ruler. Beta Persei personally did the work of adjusting the cannon ruler. He was one of Yang Chindong's direct disciples. He really put a lot of effort into it. Now was the time to put it into practice. How could he let others do it? Everyone looked on helplessly as Xianxia stretched out his thumb and measured the direction of the wind. He was so busy that he couldn't be happier. At the Walla artillery position outside the West City Gate, all 100 cannons were placed here at the moment. It was obvious that Yes Hen was going all out to take down Turpan City. In his opinion, this was an excellent opportunity to capture Yang Chendong alive. He would never miss it. Chapter 1263. In order to prevent the enemy from abandoning the city and fleeing, under his coordination, every gate of the city was guarded by the cavalry of the 5 allied nations. This was to ensure that the 5-star army would either not leave the city, or once they left the city, they would be stopped and intercepted by the strongest forces. "Yang Chendong, oh Yang Chendong, let's see where you can escape to this time. Continue to fire the cannons. Blast them to death." Yes Hen rode on his horse, his voice carrying a murderous aura, but his face was full of joy. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the current situation. Just like how Yang Chendong was sent to rescue the 1st Cavalry Division at the Ala Mountain Pass, Yeshen's move of sending his 100,000 troops was not just to defeat the 5-star army. Can't he see that Yang Chendong is dividing the combat power of the 5-star army? But he did it anyway, so that he could surround Turpan and give himself a chance to take the head of the general in the midst of an army of 10,000. Now that the opportunity was about to present itself, how could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? How could he not be happy? The cannons were still firing. Due to some quality issues, more than 10 of the 100 cannons had been turned into duds, and a dozen more were about to come to an end. However, he didn't care about these things. All he wanted was to take down Turpan City and kill Yang Chendong. Of course, it would be best if he could capture him alive. He could probably exchange this person for a lot of good things that he wanted. At that time, without the 5-star army holding him back, he would be invincible on the grasslands once again. It was unknown what he thought of, but a smile flashed across his face. At this moment, he also had the potential to become a mental patient, to the extent that when the deputy generals at his side saw this appearance, they unknowingly distanced themselves a bit, each of them carrying a cautious expression on their faces. Inside the city, after a series of operations, Xianxia was ready to fire the cannons. He chuckled and waved at the Black Knight Dragon Guards not far away. "Come on, bring me a box of cannonballs." These were the treasures of the 5-star army. Due to the lack of technology and raw materials, the production of cannonballs had always been extremely complicated. It was already considered good if 2 or 3 out of 10 cannonballs were up to standard. There might even be some duds, which was something that couldn't be bought with money. This was also one of the main reasons why the 5-star army had to increase the number of cavalry units. Once cannonballs could be used freely one day, it would be much easier for them to fight battles. There were 6 cannonballs in one box, a total of 10 boxes. Looking at the golden cannonballs, Beta Persei had a dazed look on his face. Brothers, it's up to you. Don't let them be duds. Of course, Beta Persei did not know that these were all taken out by Yang Chendong from the big warehouse. There was no problem with their quality, and it was even more impossible for them to be duds. Fire! Under Beta Persei's shout, the cannonball was loaded into the barrel. Then, with a long whistle, a seemingly invisible flame rushed out of the barrel and shot towards the Walla army's artillery positions outside the city. Compared to the beaming red barbarian cannons that could only hit 200 to 300 meters away, the mortar cannons had a range that could kill the enemy in minutes. It was like a knife versus a pair of scissors. They were not on the same level at all. The Walla artillery positions outside the city were surrounded by majestic Walla cavalry. Considering the power of the cannons and the threat they posed to Turpan's towers, Yeshen ordered more than once that they had to be on high alert. They had to be constantly on guard against the 5-star army's cavalry rushing out. Once this place was destroyed, they would lose a very important trump card. Therefore, those who were assigned to stand guard here were all elite veterans with eagle eyes, the strength of a bear, and the morale of a tiger. But even if they were powerful cavalry, in the face of the cannons falling from the sky, they had no effect at all. The so-called defense was just like paper. When the cannonball fell, they didn't even have time to react or dodge. Because no one thought that there would be cannons in Turpan, and they didn't even know how much more advanced they had. Whoosh, boom! The cannonball fell from the sky and accurately landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. With a deafening sound, the cannons at the landing point were immediately sent flying into the air. When they fell to the ground, they had already become a pile of scrap metal. The explosion quickly formed a large pothole. The snow on the ground, the stones on the ground, and the soil on the ground were also lifted up, flying in all directions and exploding. Some of the Walla cavalry that were closer were also unlucky and fell to the ground. They were blown away by the shockwave. A rumbling sound echoed in his ears and woke up Yeshen, who was still dreaming. His hands trembled and he almost fell off his horse. After he finally calmed himself down, he asked anxiously, "What's going on? Did the cannons explode?" In the past, there were red barbarian cannons. Because of the quality of the cannons, they suddenly exploded and injured a few cavalry. So he instinctively thought in this direction. Leader, it wasn't an explosion. The cannons fired by the 5-star army landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. We lost 6 cannons in an instant. A general in charge of the safety of the cannons ran in front of Yeshen with a bitter face. His duty was to protect the safety of the cannons, but he could only defend against the cannons on the ground. His main duty was to prevent the 5-star army cavalry from charging out of the city. He didn't expect to be able to defend against the cannonballs falling from the sky. That was definitely not the area they could defend against. Looking at the general's crying face, Yeshen asked in shock. "What? You said the 5-star army also has cannons? How is that possible?" Yeshen instinctively shouted this sentence. In his opinion, if the 5-star army really had cannons, they would have used them a long time ago. Why would they wait until now? But thinking about it, weren't firearms one of the most important reasons why the 5-star army was so strong? Since he could get his hands on 100 red barbarian cannons, how could the enemy not have them? In his heart, he hated Yang Chendong's calmness. Only now did he take out the cannons and use them. He really could keep his composure. But because of this, he was even more happy as he analyzed. Looks like the 5-star army is really at their wits' end. They even used cannons. Looks like this is their last resort. This way, they won't have too many cannons. Find the location of the enemy's cannons and destroy them. When that time comes, let's see how they will fight against us. Yeshen believed that Turpan's defense had reached its most critical point. If not, they wouldn't have used their trump card, the cannons. Because of this, he concluded that the defense had reached its most critical point. Now, it was up to them to destroy the enemy's cannons and regain the initiative. That's right, the 5-star army only had 2 cannons. Compared to the number of cannons, it was a lot less. However, the quality of the cannons was much higher. They were small, accurate, powerful, and had a long range. How could Bai Ming's clumsy red barbarian cannons compare to them? The so-called cannon general listened to Ye Shen's order, and his face became even more bitter. He wanted to say that he didn't see the location of the 5-star army's cannons. He only heard the sound and his cannons were seriously damaged. He didn't even see the enemy's shadow at all. But he didn't dare to say these words because he found that Ye Shen was already in a rage. If he dared to say this at this time, he was afraid that he would die before the cannons were destroyed. Yes, I will try my best. He didn't say anything, but he had to obey. The cannon general agreed and rushed towards the cannons again. At this time in Turpan, the observation soldiers on the city gate tower had already passed on the news that 6 of the enemy's cannons were destroyed in one shot. It immediately caused a burst of exclamations and shouts of excitement from the crowd. Seeing how excited the people around him were, and how they were looking at him with envy and admiration, Yang Er's heart was filled with joy. Come, I'll show everyone the power of our cannons again. Whoosh boom. Whoosh whoosh. Boom boom boom. As if it was smooth sailing, golden cannonballs blasted out and landed on Ye Shen's cannons. The cannons that couldn't find their opponents in time became fixed targets and were quickly hit one by one. One of the cannonballs unfortunately fell on the ammunition box next to the cannons and immediately caused a second explosion. The destruction caused in that instant destroyed the remaining Bai Ming red barbarian cannons. Not only that, dozens of cavalrymen around were not much better. They were injured by iron shrapnel and fell off their horses one by one. The cannons became a sea of fire, and then became a ruin. Without the support of the cannons, the siege couldn't help but stagnate. More young men and women of Turpan rushed up the city gate tower again, using the advantage of the high ground to launch a strong counterattack. What's going on? He Qi asked the others to command in his place, then came in front of Ye Shen and asked aloud. There was no need for an answer. Just by looking at the sea of fire that was still burning, it was clear at a glance. Are the cannons of the 5-star army that powerful? Did anyone see where they came from? Will they still fire at us? In a short period of time, He Qi asked 3 consecutive questions. The first question naturally didn't need to be answered. Facts spoke louder than words. The second question was basically answered. The cannons came from within the city. Just from this point alone, the attack range of the 5-star army's cannons couldn't be compared to the destroyed red barbarian cannons in their hands. As for the third question, no one could answer. Perhaps only Yang Chendong knew whether the 5-star army would fire or not. Chapter 1264. He Kagan's expression turned ugly when he didn't receive any news. He originally thought that victory was in the bag. With the addition of the cannons, he was even more certain of victory. However, as the 5-star army started using cannons, the outcome became uncertain. Why don't we retreat first? This Turpan city is a tough nut to crack. Why don't we find a chance to fight them on the plains? After a short moment of silence, Kazakhstan's Kale tentatively expressed his opinion. He had already received information that an elite force of the 5-star army was approaching Turpan city. At the same time, the battle at the Ayla mountain pass that was previously agreed upon did not seem to be going well. This made him realize how strong the enemy was. No wonder they needed the 5-star army to fight. Of course, if Kale knew that the so-called battle was already in name only. Apart from the 100,000 Walla army that could still hold on, the other 3 armies had already been defeated. He probably wouldn't have asked this tentatively. Instead, he would have made the suggestion without hesitation. After all, they had worked so hard for so long. Moreover, after the bombardment of Turpan city, there were indeed some areas that were in danger of collapsing. It would be a pity to give up now. In the end, He Kagan, who had an extreme personality, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that he hated the 5-star army to the bone, made the final decision. Continue to attack. Attack for 3 more days. If it still doesn't work, then we can retreat. After working so hard for so long and seeing that success was at hand, he was unwilling to retreat now. Because of this, he thoroughly hated the citizens of Turpan. This was because he had already discovered that it was these citizens, especially some young and strong men, who had climbed up the city walls. There were also some retired soldiers who helped to defend the city. This was why his attack was stopped and he couldn't succeed. This was the benefit of Yang Chendong using money to buy people. If it was said that in the beginning they were working for the five-star army for money, then now it was for themselves. These days, whether it was those who died in battle, those who were injured, or those who were still defending the city, they had saved up a large amount of silver. Even if it was just for this money, they had to defend Turpan City well and not let the 5 allied armies come in and snatch the fruits of their victory. At this moment, in Turpan City, a group of people were cheering loudly, all of them revealing radiant and sincere smiles. Originally, they were worried that the Walla army's cannons would pose a threat to them. But when the 5-star army took out their cannons, they finally witnessed the power of cannons. They were more confident in defending the city, and naturally they were more confident in protecting their own property. Seeing how powerful the cannons of the 5-star army were, many citizens couldn't help but suggest excitedly, "Why don't we fire these cannons into the enemy's camp? That way, we won't have to do anything and the city will be completely defended, right?" No. Hearing that someone was thinking about the cannons, Beta Persei immediately gave a decisive refusal. For him, these cannonballs were like the roots of his life. Although shooting them out now could cause chaos in the 5 countries' coalition forces and solve the crisis of the city being besieged, this was not the young master's intention. In his opinion, it should not be the right time. Since Yang Chendong didn't have this intention, how could Beta Persei make a decision on his own? Everything was still waiting for the order to be given. As the saying goes, good steel should be used on the blade. The cannons finally stopped firing. Yes Hen wanted to use the cannons because they were all blown up, so he couldn't use them anymore. The 5-star army deliberately held back. Yes Hen and the others didn't know about this. After watching the cannons being razed to the ground, he led the cavalry out of the camp and stood scattered outside the city. Because he wasn't sure if the other side would bombard the barracks. If so, how could they fight this battle if they couldn't even see the shadow of the enemy's cannons? Yes Hen was even ready to retreat at any time. But after waiting for more than an hour, he didn't hear the sound of cannons. His originally fearful face slowly calmed down. It seems that the 5-star army doesn't have a lot of cannons. That's good. There's a possibility to continue fighting. Beta Persei regarded the cannons as his lifeblood, which caused Yes Hen to misunderstand. This also meant that they were destined to receive a bloody lesson soon. Without the addition of cannons on both sides, the war returned to normal, and the siege of the city continued with cold weapons. With the support of the 40,000 strong men in Turpan, it wasn't that easy for the 5 Alliance army, which didn't have much military strength, to break through. For a time, both sides fell into a deadlock. Also in a stalemate was Walla's 90,000 strong army and the 5-star army's cavalry. Bo Mu brought 70,000 troops and logistics to the vanguard camp. After meeting up with them, he knew everything that had happened. Regarding the fact that he couldn't break through the defensive formation of the 5-star army, nor could he rescue the 10,000 Turpan cavalrymen led by Erifu, who had tipped them off, Bo Mu didn't feel any guilt. This wasn't part of the battle plan, and he had no obligation to save them. On the contrary, Bo Mu was distressed by the loss of 6,500 cavalry in the first battle. The original Vala army was very powerful, and even the great Khan Tuachu Obuhua had fallen under their blades. But ever since Yang Chendong suddenly appeared and the 5-star army entered the grasslands, the situation immediately changed. The Walla army lost every battle they fought, and their losses were reduced. Now that they didn't even have a place to stand, wanting to replenish their manpower became an extremely extravagant matter. This was why every single fighting force in the camp was so precious. Meanwhile, just a single attack actually cost them 6,500 cavalry. This was truly something Bo Mu didn't expect, and it also made him understand even more clearly how terrifying the 5-star army was. Even though he had 90,000 cavalry in his hands, according to the information from the scouts, the 5-star army didn't even have 50,000 men. With the advantage in numbers, he had confidence in beating back the 5-star army in a frontal battle. However, the consequences of doing so would undoubtedly be great. The best result would be a heavy blow to the 5-star army's cavalry, making the other side lose 50,000 men. Compared to the disastrous losses he would suffer in the end, this kind of result was clearly not what Bo Mu wanted to see. In comparison, the 5-star army was clearly much more valiant. They had an extremely stable rear, and an extremely stable source of recruits. However, losing 50,000 men wasn't a big deal at all. This was the benefit of having a strong rear. It was a pity that even though he could clearly see all of this, Xianxia just couldn't learn it. He didn't understand production at all, nor did he know how to manage the people's hearts. Even if he was given a territory, it would only give him a fixed goal. He definitely wouldn't be able to become like Yang Chendong, expanding his influence and stabilizing it. Perhaps this was the difference between them. The starting point was completely different, and it would directly lead to a completely different outcome. We can't fight head-on. After a sigh, Bo Mu made an extremely helpless decision. Then are we just going to watch the 5-star army run wild in front of us like this? Bian Qiyin, who had just suffered a defeat, had an expression of unwillingness on his face. Let's wait a little longer. He didn't take the initiative to answer this question, instead choosing to evade it. Bo Mu wanted to report the situation here to leader Xianxia, who was at the foot of Turpan, and wait for the final result. Now that both the Yirqiang and Turpan cavalry had been defeated, it seemed like this battle was already over before it even started. However, it wasn't that there wasn't any hope. For example, there were still 80,000 Ili cavalry at the Ala mountain pass. Perhaps that would become a new counterattack point. If they could deal with the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division and continue east, they could try to launch a pincer attack on both sides. It wasn't that Bo Mu was stupid to place his hopes on the 80,000 Ili cavalry, but it was because of the lack of information. It could be imagined that if he already knew that his allies had been defeated, and had been defeated so miserably, he probably wouldn't continue to wait here. He might even turn around and flee without asking for permission from Xianxia. Bo Mu needed to ask for permission, and he still had a trace of hope in his heart. However, he didn't know that the 30,000 soldiers of the foreign race's 1st Army were currently rushing over from the northeast. In order to completely resolve the situation in the Ili region, Yang Chendong had adopted the method of continuously recruiting soldiers. This first batch of soldiers had already been sent over, totaling over 100,000 men. Apart from the 2nd Army, which was protecting the first batch of 300,000 civilians, the target of the 5 new armies was the besieged Turpan city, while the 1st Army's target was Yeshen's 100,000 cavalry. As a former division commander, Su Kuda had commanded over 30,000 soldiers at his peak. Compared to his current position as a commander, he wasn't much inferior. With this experience, he didn't feel uncomfortable being a commander. Instead, he quickly adapted to the role. This time, after receiving the telegram order, he hurried over as soon as he left the 8-mile city. The heavy snow also affected the marching speed of the 1st Army of the non-human kind. After the snow covered the legs of the horses, the marching speed dropped to the lowest point. Seeing that it was getting closer and closer to the time when the order was given, an anxious look flashed across the face of Commander Su Chengda. If they couldn't reach the assembly point on time, it would be tantamount to disobeying orders. At that time, could he still use the weather as an excuse? Although he was already a military commander, he was still only a senior colonel. Why was that? Wasn't it because he hadn't fought a good battle? How could he convince the masses? Chapter 1265. I don't care anymore. Increase the speed. Hurry up. Seeing that the snow showed no signs of stopping, it was only a little lighter than before. However, it was still snowing heavily. Su Kuda had no choice but to order the army to increase their speed. Perhaps this was because he rarely saw heavy snow in his living environment. He couldn't find a solution in such a harsh environment. When Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 103rd Division, took the initiative to report the situation to him, he didn't even see him. Humph. Just another commander who came to dissuade me from marching carefully. With a military order in front of me, how can I be stingy with the horses? I don't want to see them all. In the past few days, more than one person had told him that marching in such heavy snow was a great burden on the soldiers and horses. Under such circumstances, even if they reached the designated location, they wouldn't be able to launch an attack. It was better to explain the situation to Bugnam of Gojoseon and then proceed to the destination while preserving their strength. It was because of this that Su Kuda didn't want to see his commander. Of course, this also had a lot to do with the prejudice in his heart. Sensei Naganabu was a citizen of the Japanese Empire. He didn't have a good impression of this race that repeatedly offended the Great Han Empire. Naturally, he wouldn't like to see them. But because of his actions, Sensei Naganabu, who came to give the suggestion, was rebuffed. Because of this, he couldn't come up with a good idea, which affected the speed of the army gathering. In the end, Walla's 100,000 cavalry managed to escape the disaster. Seeing that his commander was blocked, Sensei Naganabu could only helplessly return to his division. Living in the Japanese Empire, he was used to seeing heavy snow. Originally, he had his own method, for example the progressive method. In other words, today, one division would be in charge of the road. This was of course very hard work, but it didn't matter. The next day, another division would be in charge of the road. By repeating this, 1 day of work and 3 days of rest would be created. This way, they could create a path for the army to walk on. Their speed would also increase a lot. Tsukuda didn't even want to see him, so what could he do? He wanted to use this method himself, but without a military order, his 103rd Division couldn't go past the 101st and 102nd Divisions to act as the vanguard. Otherwise, it would be a huge crime to move troops without orders. Sensei Naganabu shook his head helplessly and gave up. On the other hand, the new 5 armies that were marching towards Turpan from 8 Mile City were much faster. They were using the method that Sensei Naganabu had in mind. One army had 4 divisions, and they were advancing in a progressive manner. Although their speed was not fast enough due to the heavy snow, it was much faster than just having one division clear the way and giving each division time to rest. Commander Shi Wanshan was in the Wan-All department all year round, and it often snowed there. Naturally, he already had a plan for how to travel in the snow. Under his lead, the new 5 armies quickly approached Turpan City. Not far to the north, the 3rd and 4th divisions of the 4th Division were also running under the lead of Ling Dechang. The snow was too heavy, and Ling Dechang gave up on the bicycle in his hands. After leaving a company to guard the area, he led the rest of the cold vanguard warriors to advance on foot. If it was on flat ground, walking was naturally faster than a warhorse. However, under the heavy snow, it was a completely different story. Many times, a single person's speed was even faster. Especially those who were able to become the cold vanguard warriors. Which one of them didn't have good military qualifications? Their speed wasn't bad at all. Ling Dechang led more than 4,000 soldiers to change their pace. This made the Vara and Kazakh cavalry, who were in charge of following and pinning them down, extremely anxious. The heavy snow was also a huge obstacle for them. Coupled with the occasional gust of wind, they actually lost track of the cold vanguard warriors. The 4th Division was nowhere to be seen. Because of this, Chao Lu and Gu Lijiang, who were leading the troops, were naturally extremely anxious. After trying all sorts of methods to no avail, they had no choice but to make a decision that they were unwilling to make. That was to report the situation back. Although they would be reprimanded for doing so, this was an important matter, and they couldn't afford to play any tricks. Under the heavy snow, even the speed of the scouts and messengers was greatly affected. What these people in charge of relaying the orders didn't know was that their target, the 2nd Division, was already in front of them. Under the heavy snow, a strong gust of wind blew. In this weather where even wild beasts were unwilling to come out to look for food, there was a group of soldiers who were persevering through the snow. They held the shovels on their bodies and continued to dig. Even though the newly dug path would soon be buried by the heavy snow under the strong winds, they still worked hard to move their arms, just to create an easier path for the warriors behind them to move forward. 2nd Company has already persisted for half an hour. It's time for 3rd Company to take over. Within the group, the 3rd Company's regiment commander in charge of leading the charge shouted loudly. A group of 100 soldiers rushed forward and replaced the 2nd Company brothers in charge of clearing the path. The army continued to advance. It was with such perseverance that the 4th Division was worthy of the title, Cold Front. They shook off their pursuers on both sides and approached Turpan City step by step. They came together with the new 5 armies. They reported their positions through telegrams, and Yang Qindong naturally knew all this like the back of his hand, but the 5-nation coalition was still kept in the dark. It was said that time was money. It was the same principle on the battlefield. News and intelligence had a time limit, and whoever was slower by half a beat would lose the initiative and even get beaten up. Xianxia and the other generals were completely unaware of this crisis. They were still hoping that they could take Turpan City and capture Yangqindong alive to change the situation in one fell swoop. They didn't know that the army they had sent to intercept them had been obstructed by the heavy snow and couldn't send out a warning. They had agreed to fight for 3 more days. And today was the last day. The 5-star army and Turpan citizens on the city walls were about to fall, but every time a soldier risked his life to charge up the walls, he would be beaten back down and sent flying into the dust. What the 5 armies didn't expect was that in the afternoon, a scout suddenly came from afar and told them that Yi Erqiang and Turpan's army had been defeated at the Ala mountain pass. Although Ili hadn't sent back the news of the 80,000 soldiers' defeat, it was enough to shake the morale of the soldiers. They couldn't remain as calm as before. "We can't fight anymore," Iligua and General Kagan, whose eyes were bloodshot, finally said helplessly after the sun had set. The 10,000 infantrymen he had brought with him had all been used up, and only 3,000 of his cavalry were left. The other 4 armies also suffered some losses, but they still couldn't take Turpan City. As the main attacking general, he couldn't help but admit that this path wasn't going to work. "Why don't we try another day?" In the tent of the 5 Nations Army, the Kazakh representative Kalei said unwillingly. Hearing this, Kagan's eyes couldn't help but light up, but they quickly dimmed again. "We don't have enough soldiers now. Even if we can take down Turpan City, we don't have enough cavalry to guarantee that we can trap Bugnam of Gojosian. Until now, we haven't seen a single sign of the Black Cavalry. They are Bugnam of Gojosian's strongest force." Although Kagan didn't want to admit it, he couldn't deny the strength of the 5-star army. In fact, from the fact that they needed the 5 Nations Army to fight together, it already proved the strength and terror of the 5-star army. Just like now, they had already sent out 2/3 of their forces, but they still couldn't shake the 5-star army. They didn't even have to reveal their trump cards, and the outcome of the battle was already clear. If they had to blame someone, they could only blame the 5 Nations Army for not sending out all of their forces. If Ili, Turpan and Yarqiang were willing to send out 30,000 more troops, they would have taken down Turpan City a long time ago. Even if they couldn't capture Yangqindong alive, taking down the city and injuring him wouldn't be a problem. When people work together, Mount Tai will move. However, as an army, this sentence was like a joke. No one dared to hope that they could work together. Kagan pointed out their shortcomings, and the other representatives could only lower their heads in silence. After some time, Xianxia broke the silence and said, "Don't worry, we still have a chance. This time, we forced Bugnam of Gojosian to hide in the city and not come out. This can be considered a huge blow to his arrogance. When the next chance comes, we will definitely succeed in one fell swoop." The results of the battle were not satisfactory, and there might even be accidents. At this moment, staying outside Turpan City was an extremely dangerous thing to do. If things went wrong, they might be surrounded by the reinforcements of the 5-star army. This was not something they wanted to see. In such a situation, retreating in time was a wise decision. Their leader's words also signified the end of the encirclement of Turpan. The next step was to retreat. After a good night's rest, they would leave this troublesome place early in the morning and regroup. Soon, the tent was empty, and all the generals were preparing to retreat early in the morning. However, they didn't know that the real darkness was about to descend. In their eyes, their biggest opponent, Bugnam of Gojosian, had already decided to launch an all-out attack tonight. When Yangqindong made this decision, he received a telegram from the new 5-star army and the 4th Lu Division. They were already 8 miles away from Turpan City and were ready to attack at any moment. Hearing that they were here, Yangqindong decided to launch a night attack. Chapter 1266. Launching a night attack in the heavy snow was not a wise move. However, Yangqindong could not wait any longer. Once dawn broke and the scouts of the 5 Nations Alliance discovered the new 5 armies or the 4th Army Division, the surprise of the battle would not be achieved and the effect of the attack would be greatly reduced. It was precisely because of the difficulty of a night attack in the heavy snow that Yangqindong firmly believed that the 5 Nations Alliance army would not think that he would launch a night attack. This gave him a higher chance of winning. In Turpan City, there were still 15,000 Mongolian cavalry that had gathered. There was also an army of 15,000 strong men from Turpan. The biggest benefit of the joint experience of defending the city these days was that the five-star army had completely gained a foothold here, and they had the support of all the citizens of Turpan City. These 15,000 cavalry were the strongest force left in the city. They would launch a surprise attack with Yang Chendong and join forces with the other two five-star army units that had rushed over from outside the city to achieve the goal of attacking from both inside and outside. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong, dressed in a golden battle robe, was riding on a white dragon warhorse and inspecting the army. The 30,000 cavalry were ready to go. Other than the occasional snorting of the warhorses, there was no other sound. They were like a pack of wolves silently waiting for their prey to appear, waiting for the alpha to give the order to charge. A silent army would give off a strong sense of killing intent. At this moment, even Yang Chendong was shocked by the performance of these soldiers. After nearly 20 days of defending the city, those who were able to survive until now were undoubtedly much more confident in their character and skills. These people had also grown into real soldiers. "Young master, it's almost time." Beta Persei, who was at the side, was wearing a white cloak and gave off a domineering feeling. He came to Yang Chendong's side and reminded him softly. "Okay, you go." Yang Chendong nodded silently. Following his action, Beta Persei quickly left and came to the front of the two pitch-black mortars in front of the army. He urged the soldiers to open the wooden boxes and take out the shells. Everyone, according to the previous battle plan, gather in front of the city gate. The bombardment will begin in 20 minutes, and after 30 minutes, the entire army will attack. Yang Chendong's voice came out of his mouth, and with the help of the wind, it spread throughout the entire square. After receiving the order, the 30,000-strong army dispersed in all directions and moved towards their respective assembly points in an orderly manner. Looking at everyone's orderly appearance, the captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade, Chiu Vi, couldn't help but exclaim, "These 30,000 cavalry soldiers are already qualified soldiers. They will definitely play a greater role on the battlefield in the future." Yang Chendong naturally heard this sentence, and a smug smile appeared on his face. Who would have thought that after more than 10 days of defending the city, he would have an additional cavalry of the Mongol alliance in his hands? He had already thought about it. When he returned, he would also integrate the cavalry of Turpan into the Mongol alliance. At that time, he would have another powerful force that he could use. The war horses disappeared from the square one by one. Time passed by slowly. Finally, when the war watch's needle reached 20 minutes, Beta Persei shouted the horn to start the counterattack. Fire! Boom! 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 The two 100mm mortars immediately let out a deep roar, and then a red light flashed in the silent night. Then there was a loud rumble that shook the earth, and the shells fell into the camp of the 5 countries that had already entered a state of rest. The sudden sound of the cannons instantly plunged several large tents into a sea of fire. Shouts, curses, reprimands, and cries for help could be heard incessantly. No one would have thought that killing intent would descend from the sky in the middle of the night. When the cannons fell one after another, there were still many soldiers of the 5 countries that didn't react. They were still staring at the sea of fire in front of them, as if they had fallen into a daze. The sound of the cannons was an order. 8 miles away from the camp, the new 5th Army and the 4th Army Division's 2 cold vanguard regiments immediately moved out, maintaining a constant speed as they approached Turpan. They already knew through the telegram that tonight would be a night of slaughter. "Quick, everyone get up. I'm afraid the weather is about to change." Yes Hen didn't sleep very deeply, and this had a lot to do with his many years of marching and fighting. At this time, his slightly aged face became very serious, and he had a very bad feeling. Kagan, who had lost his nose, had already gotten up from the tent. At this moment, his face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with the flames of anger. It was the 5-star army again. This was a huge rock that had been pressing down on him since the beginning of the battle. He really didn't know when he would be able to move it away. Kazakh General Kelly was in charge of the night watch, and his soldiers were the first to gather. At this moment, he looked at Turpan with a very resolute gaze, and said to the generals beside him, "Gather the troops. If there's nothing wrong, immediately retreat." This was the decision of a wise man, knowing that it was impossible but still doing it. This kind of thing basically wouldn't happen to them. If they couldn't win, then they would run. This was their way of survival. In the large tents belonging to the generals, each of them had different reactions, but it was undeniable that they all had one thing in common, and that was that their expressions were very serious. It was only 10 minutes of cannons, and it would be over very quickly. The number of soldiers that died in the explosion wasn't that many. What was needed was a kind of momentum, like the clouds of fire that appeared in the fire tent. This was the effect of the cannons. The drop in morale was the true power of the cannons. Open the city gates, kill! Yang Chendong gave the order to charge and kill from within the city. In an instant, the 4 city gates opened from the inside, and countless cavalry charged out with sabers in their hands. At the same time, the new 5-star army and the 4th Lu Division's Lung Feng brothers also arrived on the battlefield. The sounds of charging and the sound of gunfire rang out incessantly, and the true attack had begun. No one had expected that on this last night, the 5-star army would suddenly launch an all-out counterattack. This was a kind of coincidence, but for the 5-star army, it was an undeniable disaster. When the sounds of killing rang out from every direction, and under the moonlight and fire, one could see a large number of black figures charging over. The 5-star army's camp was completely thrown into chaos. The so-called Alliance army was originally unable to truly be of one heart and mind, and was as solid as a plate of iron. The sudden disaster really did live up to the old saying, when a disaster strikes, everyone flies away. The first to leave were the most well-prepared Kazakh cavalry. Under Keliai's lead, 50,000 cavalry rushed towards the southwest. When they left, they did not inform anyone. In Keliai's heart, this time, in the attack on Turpan City, which the 5-star army thought was a turtle in a jar, he had already lost 10,000 cavalry and had already fulfilled his duty. Right now, there were the figures of the 5-star army in all directions. Knowing that this battle was impossible to win, he naturally had nothing to say about leaving. The next to leave was Yes Hen. The difference was that he did not head towards the southwest, which was the rear of the Ili region. Instead, he headed towards the northwest, which was the hinterland of the 5-star army. Of course, he was not looking for trouble. Instead, he was going to meet up with one of his 4 generals, Bo Muir. After roaming the grasslands for more than a decade, Yes Hen deeply understood that the safest thing to do was to have military power in his hands. This was the same idea as the future where power came from the barrel of a gun. He Kagan also escaped. Under the protection of his personal guards and a few Kiliarchs, he brought 1,000 soldiers and escaped. It was not that he did not want to bring more soldiers. After more than 10 days of sieging, he only had 3,000 soldiers left. In this battle, he had lost another 2,000. Being able to bring out 1,000 people was already his greatest effort. Apart from these 3 armies, the generals and soldiers sent out by Yirkiang and Turpan were a bit slower to react. However, they were only half a beat slower and were surrounded by the 5-star army from all directions. Some of them were even waiting for reinforcements from their allies. However, how could they know that no one told them to leave? It was just to let them stay and attract the firepower of the 5-star army. Now, it seemed that they had really become scapegoats. The situation was one-sided from the start. First, the cannons attacked from afar, disrupting the defensive arrangements of the 5 allied forces. Then, the cavalry swarmed in from all directions, crushing the morale of the allied forces to the lowest point. What followed was one encirclement battle after another. Under the unfavorable conditions of insufficient troops, low morale, the encirclement battle quickly ended before noon the next day. In this battle, 13,000 soldiers of the 5-star army were wiped out, and 30,000 prisoners were taken. In the end, the so-called surprise decapitation operation of the 5 allied forces ended in failure, with the loss of soldiers and a great loss of strength. When the news spread back to the various factions, they were shocked and immediately sent out envoys to Turpan City. They brought large amounts of gold, silver, and other valuables. It was obvious that they wanted to lower their heads and beg for peace. Yang Chendong did not have any intention of rejecting this. Although he never accepted peace and only accepted surrender, the weather was cold and snow was everywhere. This was very disadvantageous for the army. Taking this opportunity to reorganize the army, it was not impossible to fight again in the spring. Taking this opportunity to take some money and lower the other side's vigilance. Wasn't this a strategic strategy? Turpan City returned to its peaceful state, and the citizens of the city were beaming with joy. Not only did they survive this battle, many of them had also gained benefits. In their hearts, the name of Bugnam of Gojoseon, or the Heavenly Khan, had unknowingly increased. When Yang Chendong returned from the battlefield outside the city, he was welcomed by the hundreds of thousands of people in the city. Regarding this, Yang Qindong naturally waved his hand in a high-spirited manner. He would never put on airs in front of the citizens, because these were his future citizens. Even second- and third-class citizens were still citizens. Chapter 1267. Young Master, this is the will of the people. Seeing so many people spontaneously showing happy smiles on their faces, Beta Persei did not forget to flatter him. This is because we brought them more than King Harden Barter brought them. Of course the people will make a choice. It's just that they were born here. They can welcome me today, but in the future, they may choose to welcome others when they are given more benefits. So the migration work cannot be stopped. When the people of the provinces arrive, they will all be replaced. Yang Qindong will not easily believe others, let alone change his previous decision because of a smiling face. Since the facts have proven that the migration work is the best way to solve the internal problems, of course he will not hesitate to carry it out and will not change it at will. Yes, young master. Beta Persei quickly agreed. One of his main tasks working next to Yang Qindong was to act as an assistant. He would remember everything that was said and ordered and would instruct the specialized people to carry it out later. After agreeing, Beta Persei summarized the information he had just received. Young Master, just now the commander of the new 5th Army, Shi Wanshan, made a request. There are 100,000 Walla cavalry in the northwest and 20,000 Walla cavalry in the northeast. He wants to try to chase them all the way. Young Master, please give the order. A total of 40,000 cavalrymen were sent to stop the 4th Army Division. Among them, 20,000 were Walla and 20,000 were Kazakh. When the general counterattack was launched last night, Yeshen did not escape to the southwest like the other coalition forces, but chose to go to the northwest to join Bo Muir's 100,000 iron cavalry. Now the problem is that Yang Qindong only has a seemingly mobile new 5th Army in his hands. Their ability can only destroy one part of the enemy, so the choice must be decided by Yang Qindong. Is there a need to choose? Yang Qindong stopped and looked back at Beta Persei. Beta Persei, who didn't know what Yang Qindong meant, was a little confused, but since the young master asked, he still said tentatively, "We should choose to pursue Yeshen. This is our old opponent. It's best to take this opportunity to get rid of him." Sigh. A soft sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. Thinking that his answer did not satisfy the young master, Beta Persei scratched the back of his head and said, "Then let's pursue the 40,000 cavalrymen. They are few in number and easy to deal with." Well, it looks like you can't think of a good idea. Let's do it this way. The new 5th Army will be responsible for pursuing the 40,000 cavalrymen of the coalition forces. Matson will lead 30,000 cavalrymen to pursue the escaping Yeshen. This time, we can't let any of them go. Yang Qindong said with an extremely firm voice. In his eyes, there was no such thing as choosing one of the two. He wanted to choose both. When he heard that even the 30,000 cavalrymen under Matson would be sent out, Beta Persei became nervous. Young master, this way, we won't have any troops around us. Once what? Do you think the coalition forces would dare to come to Turpan at this time? Besides, it's not like we don't have any troops. Don't we still have 2,000 black cavalry and 2 regiments of cold front warriors? They are the most elite. Are you afraid that they won't be able to protect the young master? Yang Qindong knew what Beta Persei wanted to say, so he just said it directly. Yang Qindong was so decisive that Beta Persei knew that there was no room for negotiation. He immediately said, "Yes, I will give them the order according to the young master's instructions." At this time, the 5 nations coalition forces had just been defeated. They really didn't have the courage to cause trouble for Turpan at this time. In addition, whether it was the black cavalry or the cold front warriors, they could each fight against 10 enemies. So the security around him wasn't bad. Beta Persei thought about it and found that there was no problem, so he went to pass the order. Soon, the 2 armies received the order and went to their respective targets. Northeast of Turpan. From afar, it was still covered in snow and a vast expanse of white. The cold wind blew, blowing on people's faces as if they were being cut by a knife. A large formation of cavalry was currently moving with great difficulty on this road. They were Gu Lijiang's troops who had lost their target. At this moment, Gu Lijiang's face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that the wind and snow this time would be so heavy that he even lost his target. Now, all he could see was a vast expanse of white. Where do you want him to go to find the missing 5-star army? Should he just go back like this? Gu Lijiang didn't dare. He clearly understood Kellyai's temperament. He was the younger brother of Aksan Janabek Khan. In the entire country and the military, he wouldn't give face to anyone except his elder brother. Many times, in order to establish his authority, he would find trouble and kill people. Not to mention that he had just committed a grave mistake. He couldn't just admit defeat like this. He had to continue looking. Maybe there was still a chance. Gu Lijiang said, then ordered to continue expanding the search area. At this moment, for his own life, his own mission, he completely ignored the soldiers in the army who had been working for 2 days without rest. The snow finally stopped, but it still continued. Under the sky, visibility was very low. It was precisely because of this that Ning Wenfeng's infantry division approached the area without being discovered. It wasn't until the other side was less than 3 miles away that both sides discovered each other at the same time. There's the 5-star army here. There's an enemy here. It was also at this time that the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 5-star army arrived. Under the leadership of Division Commander Ancient River, they appeared on the battlefield like fierce tigers. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Kazakh cavalry's morale finally began to show signs of collapse. In ancient times, when 2 sides fought, it was a battle of morale. Regardless of which side had this point, it was very likely that they would win. Even if they had fewer troops, there were many examples of people who won with fewer troops. No matter which side, once the morale of the troops collapsed, no matter how many soldiers there were, they would only be a motley crew. In the end, they would only be defeated. The appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division had broken the morale of Gu Lijiang's troops. The soldiers under her had either fled or surrendered. There weren't many people who were still fighting the enemy. In the next 2 hours, the Kazakh army had been destroyed. Gu Lijiang had died in battle, and the enemy had captured about 12,000 soldiers. Come, leave 2 regiments behind to look after these prisoners. We will continue to look for the 20,000 Walla cavalry. Ning Wenfeng didn't stop just because he had obtained a victory. In his view, this was just the beginning. When Ancient River saw Ning Wenfeng's order, his eyes widened. Then he laughed heartily. Good. Division Commander Ning. I didn't expect you to have such a valiant side. You weren't like this in the past. Ancient River was right. Although Ning Wenfeng was in charge of a portion of the military in the past, he rarely did things so decisively. Even when there was a war, he rarely went to the battlefield. He was the kind of person who could be considered a military advisor. But now, he was displaying the style of a valiant general. Ancient River couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Ha ha! Ning Wenfeng replied with a smile. Of course, the current situation was different from the past. When he was in the Beiming army, he was just idling around. He took the responsibility of preserving his strength. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes and was willing to send money to the higher-ups, he could keep his position. But in the 5-star army, all the military officers were judged based on their achievements. Here, there was no need to talk about seniority or background. Everything depended on who was stronger. Chapter 1268. In the face of the situation where the capable were the top and the mediocre were the bottom, as long as one was a smart person, they should know what to do. Ning Wenfeng was originally a smart person among smart people. Naturally, he understood this point long ago and naturally knew what to do. This time, Ning Wenfeng was so desperate because he wanted to rely on military achievements to prove himself. At the same time, he wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's vision was not wrong. Their new 5 armies was an army that could fight. Just like when they were rushing to Tulyafan, even though the soldiers were very tired, none of them complained. They just wanted to prove themselves and complete the mission better. Ning Wenfeng's ambition was not small, but his luck seemed to have run out. After searching for several days, he even found the cold front company that Commander De Chong had left behind to watch the bicycle's safety. However, he did not see the figure of the Walla cavalry. In fact, he did not know that General Chao Lu had already left here with 20,000 cavalry and rushed to the place where Beaumur was. Along with him was the leader of the Walla cavalry, Xianxia, who was rushing from another direction. After the failure of the 5 armies to besiege Turpan City, Xianxia lost confidence in this so-called allied army. This was not a united army at all. There were too many subordinates, and everyone wanted to take advantage of the situation. How could they win a battle when there were so many different voices in an army? How could they win a battle? How could they win a battle? Xianxia, who could not see any hope, finally gave up all his fantasies. He decided to work alone like before. With so many elite cavalry in his hands, even if they were not a match for the 5-star army, how could he be afraid of others? At worst, he would just stay away from the 5-star army in the future. How could the world be surnamed Yang? With this goal in mind, Xianxia sent someone to find Chao Lu a few days ago when Beta Persei suddenly bombarded his artillery positions. He told him not to search for the 5-star army anymore, and to go straight to where Bo Muir was. They had to leave this place and stay away from all the forces and territories of the 5-star army. Reality proved that Yezi's thoughts were correct. When he saw the 5-star army's counterattack begin, he did not put up any resistance, nor did he have any desire to fight back. Instead, he quickly led his 15,000 cavalry out of Turpan, heading straight for where Bo Muir was. Originally, he had 20,000 cavalrymen with him. However, when the siege was not going well, he listened to Hikagen's words and took out 5,000 cavalrymen. He told them to give up their expertise in horsemanship and become infantrymen to siege the city. In the end, other than the 600 injured, the rest died in the siege. This made him hate Hikagen and the others even more. You deserve to lose. What kind of idiot general would give such an order to let the infantry attack the city? Xianxia thought angrily. He did not think about it at all. When Keegan made this suggestion, he had raised both hands in agreement. Whether it was Xianxia or Chao Lu, they were now leading their cavalry to Bo Muir's location as fast as possible. But they did not know that Bo Muir's situation was not good at this moment. At least, he was far from being in control of the situation as they thought. In terms of military strength, Bo Muir, who had nearly 100,000 cavalry, was undoubtedly the most powerful. But they were facing the nearly 50,000 5-star army, and all of them were elites. No one would underestimate such an opponent, nor would they dare to. The two sides faced each other like this, separated by 8 li in the wind and snow. No one moved rashly. It looked like they were evenly matched, but only Bo Muir knew that as the days passed, his situation would only get worse. There was only one reason, and that was that he was facing the 5-star army. This was a powerful enemy that could send reinforcements at any time. On the other hand, he already had the most cavalry. Even if leader Xianxia and General Chao Lu came here, there was a limit to how much they could increase their strength. Compared to the 5-star army who would send countless reinforcements, and compared to Yang Chendong who was so rich that no one could see his trump cards, the longer the stalemate, the more unfavorable it would be for them. Even though he clearly knew this, Bo Muir could not retreat. First, he had already received news from leader Xianxia, telling him to wait here. He could not guarantee where he would meet up with the leader if he left now. Second, in the current situation, the two sides could still maintain the balance if they did not move. But if one side left, would the other side chase after them? If it was a direct confrontation, with 100,000 cavalry, Bo Muir didn't fear the 5-star army that had less than 50,000 cavalry. However, if he took the initiative to leave, and the enemy began to pursue him, even he didn't dare to guarantee what would happen during the pursuit. In other words, Bo Muir was currently being watched and could not move. He could not guarantee that he would be able to escape unscathed. Now all he could do was wait for leader Xianxia to appear, and let him decide on the big plan. Compared to Bo Muir's side, the 5-star army's side was also not in a good situation. Everything was because the first army did not appear on time, causing the pincer attack to be delayed again and again. In the camp, Commander Bai Shuang, who was dressed in a mighty military uniform and had the rank of senior colonel, said, "I have already reported the matter of the first army not appearing on time to teacher." His voice was firm, his expression calm. Bai Shuang's words caused the expressions of the other commanders in the tent to change. Everyone knew that the first army didn't arrive on time. For this matter, the new 5-star army commander Su Ku had personally called Commander Su He of the new 5-star army, saying that because the snow was too thick and the roads were difficult to travel on, their advance speed was greatly hindered, and they were unable to reach the designated location on time. He admitted his mistake and asked for 5 more days. He would definitely arrive on time and ask for forgiveness at that time. After receiving the contents of this telegram, Commander Su He immediately took it out and showed it to all the commanders around him. Although he did not say anything, sometimes not saying anything represented his attitude. It meant that Su He wanted to give face to Su Kuda. The army would wait for 5 more days before launching the attack. For a dignified army commander to admit his mistake, and with such a humble attitude, the other military commanders had no choice but to suppress their anger. After all, they were all in the same pot, and it was impossible for them not to make mistakes. Giving others a chance was the same as giving themselves a chance. However, they had never imagined that Bai Shuang would suddenly say this when Su He called them together to discuss the military operation plan of how to launch the attack when the first alien army arrived 4 days later. Everyone was in an uproar at once. Compared to everyone else, Bai Shuang's identity was naturally very special. He was Yang Chendong's student. When others were just qualified to address Yang Chendong as the 6th young master, he was already close enough to address him as teacher. In ancient times, heaven, earth, ruler, teacher, and teacher were existences that were highly respected. Among them was his teacher. Teachers were also extremely particular about inheritance, and it also represented a closer relationship. Based on this, although he was only a commander, no one dared to look down on Bai Shuang's words. Even the only general present, Su He, was the same. This was because he was certain that as long as Bai Shuang did not make any major mistakes, with this person's age, his future achievements would definitely surpass his own. Therefore, when Bai Shuang said that he had already reported this matter to Yang Chendong through his own radio, Su He did not have the slightest intention of reprimanding him. He only silently mourned for Su Kuda in his heart. Commander Su, this time, it's not that I don't want to help you, but this matter has already been reported to the 6th young master. You are in trouble. A military meeting to discuss important matters was also stopped because of Bai Shuang's words. After all, even Bug Nam of Gojoseon knew about this matter. This meant that the plan could change at any time. It was a little too early for them to discuss what would happen in a few days. Yes, Su Kuda was in trouble, and the situation had indeed changed as everyone expected. When Yang Chendong received Bai Shuang's telegram in Tulyafan City, his eyes flashed with anger. If it was only because of the weather that they were unable to arrive at the designated location on time, Yang Chendong would not be so angry. But now, the first army of the foreign races didn't inform him about this matter. Instead, they wanted to hide it from him and inform the other armies. This was something Yang Chendong couldn't tolerate. This was deceit. It was a blatant lie. If they succeed this time, there may be similar things happening in the future. If this is not stopped, will there be a day when the military commanders below join forces to deceive him, or even deal with him? Since ancient times, internal strife and even internal strife were allowed in the army, but they would never allow the loss of military power to happen. Because this is a provocation to a leader, it is a deadly threat. Inform the whole army. With anger flashing in his eyes, Yang Chendong exuded an indescribable murderous aura from top to bottom. Yang Er, who was beside Yang Chendong, felt his entire body tremble. The rage that was being emitted from Yang Chendong's body made him feel as if he was about to lose his balance. He only felt better if his entire body kept trembling. This is the aura of a superior. Army notification: new Army Commander Su He will be given a demerit. New Army Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiangshan, Far Eastern Army 1st Cavalry Division Commander Dai Qua will be given a serious warning. 4 divisional officers of the new army will be given a warning. 1st Army Commander Su Kude. Yang Chendong suddenly stopped here, which made Beta Persei, who was in charge of recording, break out in a cold sweat. He knew how big of a shock this military notification would cause. I'm afraid that many people's future prospects will be greatly affected. But who knows how the main character, Suda, would deal with this. Chapter 1269. After hesitating for a moment, Yang Chendong's expression became firm again. Su Kuda will be demoted to regiment commander, replacing Bai Shuang's position as regiment commander. Bai Shuang will assume the position of regiment commander. Everything will be carried out after this battle. After all, Bai Shuang was too young and didn't have any experience as a division commander. Being in charge of a regiment was very different from being in charge of an army. However, considering that Bai Shuang was the regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division and was already a senior colonel, it wasn't too sudden for him to take on the role of a general. As long as he made some contributions, he would be promoted. Beta Persei saw that Yang Chendong didn't have any other orders, so he went to report to Wang Shan. He could imagine what kind of influence and shock this telegram would have once it was sent to the entire army. Just as Beta Persei thought, this telegram was sent to the entire army. Any army, division, or regiment that was high enough to be equipped with a radio would soon know about it. A lot of people didn't know what happened that made Yang Chendong so angry. But as the person who knew about it, the commander of the First Army, Su Kude, was completely dumbfounded. Looking at this telegram that was extremely heavy for him, he froze in place and didn't say a word for a full 15 minutes. Commander. The commander of the 301 Division, Tu Hai, didn't know what happened. He only saw that Su Kude didn't move at all, so he carefully came up and asked, "Did Bugnam of Gojoseon have any new orders?" "Oh, you take a look. Also, don't call me commander anymore. After the army meets up with the new army, I will report to the new unit." Su Kude smiled bitterly. After he said this, he sent the telegram to his trusted subordinate, Tu Hai. At this moment, Tu Hai was also very shocked. What did he mean by not calling him commander anymore? Did he get promoted again? That shouldn't be the case. Right now, Tu Hai was still a senior colonel. It was already very difficult for him to be a commander with this position. How could there be a better position than this? With all kinds of doubts, Tu Hai opened the telegram. When he saw the contents clearly, his expression changed drastically. After a long while, he pointed at the telegram. This. He was speechless. Suka didn't care about Tu Hai's reaction. At this time, he had already awakened from his shock. This time, he had indeed done something very wrong. He actually wanted to hide the truth from the 6th young master. This kind of action of treating military orders as child's play could be interpreted as deception. This should not be tolerated by any superior. It was already a blessing that he wasn't thrown into jail. Now, he was even given the position of regiment commander. This was giving him a chance to take the blame and perform meritorious deeds. If he gave up on himself at this time, then even the gods would not be able to save him. Right now, the most important thing to do was to make up for his mistakes and stand up again. He didn't want to disappoint the 6th young master. Commander 2. Didn't Commander Mingji say that he has a way to speed up the army's advance? Now, invite him over. Before, he wanted to protect his dignity as a commander, so he suppressed the 3rd Division commander Sensei Naganabu. Now that Suku had been taught a lesson, there was no need for him to protect his dignity. Suka suddenly woke up. After that, someone reported his performance to Yang Chendong. It was also because of this action that his life was saved. Because if he really chose to give up on himself, even the position of commander of the world's #1 army might not be his. After experiencing this incident, Sukuda had finally grown up and would have greater achievements in the future. Of course, this was all in the future. In the tent, Bai Shuang looked at the telegram and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he reported this matter to Yang Chendong was because he didn't want to do anything that would let his teacher down. He didn't expect that the position of commander would fall on his head. Although a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, this kind of position was not what he wanted. With his own efforts, Bai Shuang believed that one day he would be able to become a general, and that day wasn't too far away. Now, although time was saved, it was inevitable that he would be criticized. Since it was Yang Chendong's order and it was reported to the entire army, it couldn't be changed. Since there's a heavy burden on my shoulders, I'll work hard. Bai Shuang, who knew that he couldn't change the situation, could only accept it. But now, no matter how you looked at it, his expression was like he was pretending to be obedient. Bai Shuang was pleasantly surprised. In contrast, the new army's commander Su He had a worried expression. Especially when he looked at the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Kulu, he felt even more guilty. Kulu's outstanding performance, especially when he used the strength of a single division to block the attack of 30,000 elite cavalrymen of Walla, heavily injuring the enemy in a situation where he suffered very few casualties. It was these achievements that made it a sure thing that he would be promoted to a commander. Suhi had already reported this to Yang Chendong and basically received his approval. He received news that the new army had already decided on the position of commander, and it was very likely that he would be the commander of the 102nd Division, second only to the 101 St Division's commander, Lu Zhua. It seemed that after this battle, he would be promoted by 2 ranks, from a division to an army. But now, a warning had completely ruined this good opportunity. According to the rules of the 5-star army, once an officer received a warning, there was no possibility of promotion within half a year. Half a year, by that time, the new army would have been formed, which meant that Kalu lost this opportunity to improve. Facing the silent Kalu, Suhi opened and closed his mouth, then closed and opened again. In the end, he said bitterly, "Kalu, I'm sorry." This time, Kalu's mood was a bit heavy. Seeing such a fat piece of meat fly away just like that, no one would feel good about it. But it was already the truth. There was no point in blaming anyone. He could only say that he was unlucky. Thinking about how he would have to work under Suhi in the future, Kalu could only force a smile and said, "General, I'd still like to fight under your command." No one would take these words seriously. They were obviously comforting words. Suhi waved his hand and said seriously, "This time I owe you. Don't worry, if there's an opportunity next time, I'll do my best to fight for you." "Then thank you, General, for your help." Kalu pretended to have his eyes lit up and said. But both of them knew that the position of a general wasn't easy to come by, and how could it be easy to fight for? This time, because there were 3 general positions at once, and because Kalu made a great contribution, he had the qualifications to have such a good opportunity. Next time, even if there really was a general position, there was no guarantee that it would be in the bag. Suka received the harshest criticism and demotion. But he didn't let it go. Instead, he quickly adjusted his position. Based on the principle of being in position for a minute, doing a good job for 60 seconds, he found the 303 RD Division's commander, Sensei Naganabu. After some discussion, he quickly approved of the idea of clearing snow at the front and speeding up the march. The order was quickly passed down to the entire army. Sure enough, they arrived at the designated location 3 days later. They came to the northwest of Bo Mu'er's army of 100,000, and formed a pincer attack with Suhi's new army. Bo Mu'er was a cautious person, otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Yes Hen to stay behind at the headquarters. In order to prevent being surrounded by the 5-star army, he sent out all of his scouts, and the furthest he sent them was 50 miles away. When the first army of the foreign races arrived, he received the news, and his expression became even more unsightly. Before, he could still use the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy's 5-star army. But with the appearance of the 30,000 5-star army, his advantage in numbers was very small. He didn't need to fight on both sides. No matter how he looked at it, he was now in a passive position. Fortunately, he received another message that night. Tomorrow evening, the 15,000 cavalrymen led by the previous leader and the 20,000 cavalrymen led by General Chao Lu would meet up with him here. With this, they had an additional 30,000 troops, which allowed them to regain their advantage in terms of military strength. Regrettably, this good mood didn't last long. Very quickly, the scouts came back with news that the leader had personally sent over. Behind them, there were still 35,000 cavalrymen rushing over. Both sides were only a day's distance away from each other. There are still 30,000 5-star army cavalry? Where did the other 4 countries go? Bo Mu'er was naturally shocked when he heard the news. Logically speaking, the 5-star army shouldn't have so many troops in their hands, unless they were all used to deal with him. It must be like this. The 4 countries were beaten up, and with the heavy snow affecting the speed of the army, they should be holed up at home right now. In this case, didn't it mean that the 5-star army's main goal was to deal with him? When the 5 countries were together, they couldn't gain the slightest advantage, and they even lost one battle after another. Now that he had to face the 5-star army alone, Bo Mu'er didn't have the slightest chance of victory. Being afraid before the battle, this wasn't something a qualified general should do. Forcefully calming his mind, Bo Mu'er's gaze fell on the last message sent by Yes Hen. When his gaze fell on the words, "only a day away," his eyes flashed with thought. "I can only stake it all. Come, call the scouts over." After thinking for a while, Bo Mu'er decided to take the risk and attack. He had to kill his way out before the 30,000 cavalry of the 5-star army arrived. Otherwise, if he was really surrounded, he wouldn't have the slightest chance of victory. Chapter 1270. After the scout reported that Bo Mu had given the news to Yes Hen, Bo Mu held a military meeting that very night, and selected a group of 5,000 death cavalry. The so-called death cavalry refer to those who did not fear death. Because of various reasons, they made some mistakes and should be killed. Because of this, they came to the battlefield with the determination to die. And those who were not even afraid of death were the most terrifying. Not only that, Bo Mu also gave the defeated Qin 50,000 troops, ordering him to stop the 5-star army from the west from sending reinforcements to the 5-star army from the northeast no matter what. If you can stop them, it will be a great merit. If you can't, you can use your death as an apology. Chang Tian is watching you. I wish you good luck. Under Bo Mu's serious expression, all kinds of orders were given, and the 90,000 cavalry quickly moved. At noon on the second day, they suddenly launched an attack on the first army of the non-humankind from the northeast. This sudden attack without any warning had indeed caught the first army off guard. Fortunately, Yang Qindong's report had just been sent out, and all the officers were very careful. Even if no one expected the Walla cavalry to attack, after a moment of panic, they still managed to stop the other party's attack. They did not immediately send out the 5,000 death cavalry, but only sent out 5,000 ordinary cavalry, in order to test the strength of the 5-star army. Seeing the 5,000 cavalry quickly being pushed back, unable to move an inch, Bo Mu could not help but sigh. The 5-star army is really strict and not easy to deal with. After sending out his sigh, Bo Mu had no intention of retreating. His goal was very simple, and that was to continuously attack, causing the first army to feel fatigued. Then, when leader Yes Hen and General Chao Lu arrived, he would gather a large number of troops and open a bloody path. At that time, his troops would be nearly 3 times the enemy's, and charging out should not be a problem. Now, it was time to see if Qin could defend against the attack of the 5-star army from the west. Thinking about it, it shouldn't be a problem since it was 50,000 against 50,000 and they were on the defensive side. Although the snow had stopped, the thick layer of snow still became the biggest stumbling block for the cavalry. As the attacking party, they were at a great disadvantage. It was just like how Bo Mu's attack on the first army was not very smooth. When the new army wanted to support them, they also faced great difficulties. At the beginning of the war, Commander Su He, Commander Bai Shuang, Commander Ma Xiangshan, Commander Dai Qua and the others were all confused about the reason why they started a fight without any warning. They couldn't understand why the Walla cavalry would suddenly go crazy and choose to attack at this time. Fortunately, everyone was prepared to fight a big and fierce battle when they came here. Although they weren't fully mentally prepared, the soldiers were all experienced soldiers. They quickly adapted and began to charge towards the Walla cavalry camp in an orderly manner. They wanted to attack from 2 sides with the first army. Even if they couldn't do it, they could at least share some of the firepower and pressure of their brother's army. However, under the heavy snow, the attack wasn't very effective, especially when facing General Qin who was doing his best to stop them. This person had the idea of dying if he didn't succeed. He also had 50,000 cavalry in his hands. In terms of troops and chariots, he was even more powerful than Su He and the others. In a situation where they didn't have any advantage, after Commander Chong Bo of the new army's 4th Cavalry Division attacked, 2 regiments of cavalry were crippled. Are they crazy? It was rare to encounter such a tough battle. Commander Chong Bo was shocked and quickly reported the situation to the commander. At the same time, he couldn't help but reduce the frequency of the attack. If they continued to lose like this, not only would they not be able to break through, it was very likely that his entire 4th Cavalry Division would be lost here. This was something that no military commander wanted to see and wouldn't do. In the new army's tent, after Commander Chong Bo's report was sent here, everyone including Su He frowned. It was clear that they didn't understand the actions of the Walla cavalry. It looked like they were trying to break through, but it wasn't that easy to do. Although the first army of the foreign races was a newly formed army, there were many veterans among them. Furthermore, the roads were passable, and the snow was too thick, so it would not be easy for them to charge out. It was very likely that they would suffer heavy casualties and fail to achieve their goal. They could see this logic, and so could the Walla's general. But why did they still do this? The tent was abnormally quiet for a while. After a full 15 minutes, everyone still couldn't find the slightest clue. No one said a word. In the end, it was Bai Shuang who spoke. Okay, I see that everyone can't think of a reason like me. Let's report it to the teacher. Report it? Su He raised his eyebrows after hearing this. It wasn't that he didn't think of doing this, but wouldn't that prove his incompetence? He had just been executed. But when he thought of this kind of battle, if a mistaken judgment led to even greater losses, the result was not something he could bear. Besides, who was Bai Shuang? Even if he didn't agree, he had a separate radio in his hands that could contact Yang Chendong. If that happened, he would only be more passive. Okay, then let's report it. Let's ask the 6th young master to give us a clear path. After thinking about it, Su He decided to accept Bai Shuang's suggestion. The telegram was quickly drafted. After the commanders read it and found no problems, they reported it through the radio. After a stick of incense's time, a reply came. Compared to Su He and Bai Shuang, who only focused on one army in one area, Yang Chendong looked at the entire situation. Although he didn't know about the 20,000 cavalry led by Chao Lu, he knew that Yes Hen led 15,000 elite cavalry to meet up with General Bo Muir. With Yang Chendong's intelligence, he naturally realized that Bo Muir was preparing to break out of the encirclement. At the same time, it was to prevent the 30,000 cavalry led by Na Ri Song from pressuring them enough to find a way out. After all, once Na Ri Song's 30,000 cavalry arrived, they wouldn't have any advantage in terms of numbers. This was an opportunity to make the Walla army stay. But it wasn't a good opportunity. Even a cornered beast would fight, let alone 100,000 Walla elite cavalry. Once they went crazy, coupled with the snow, the various troops might not be able to reach the designated location on time to provide reinforcements. In this way, there would be too many uncertainties in the war. After thinking about it, Yang Chendong didn't give the order to fight to the death. Instead, he pointed out the Walla army's movements and allowed the various troops to deal with it as they saw fit without losing too much of their combat strength. Dealing with it as they saw fit was equivalent to handing over the command to the various commanders. This was also Yang Chendong's way of commanding. As the military strength of his subordinates continued to expand, Yang Chendong could no longer do everything by himself like before. Therefore, it was necessary to delegate power appropriately, especially to those commanders who rushed to the front lines. They were better able to direct the movements of the battle. Sometimes, opportunities were fleeting, and if they weren't grasped in time, there might be problems. Yang Chendong had been practicing for many years and understood how to use people. It was precisely because of Yu Qian that he didn't have to worry about Qiqian City and didn't need to be distracted. Similarly, it was because of the existence of Tiger's Mane that he was like a nail nailed into Xiwan City. As a result, his influence and power were growing. To put it simply, the way to use people was to learn to use people and learn to trust people, and not to give orders in every aspect. It was like Zhuge Liang who did everything by himself. In the end, he was exhausted to death, and without his subordinates, he immediately lost his drive and ability to command. Old Jiang was the same, constantly giving orders from the back, causing the battle plan to change again and again. Loopholes appeared frequently, and the army was defeated in the end. With these precedents as an example, how could Yang Chendong follow in his footsteps? When the telegram was sent to them, the eyes of the commanders in the tent lit up after they read it. This discretion was very significant. Handing over the command to them was a form of trust, but how could it not be a heavy responsibility? Everyone, you have seen the telegram. The Walla cavalry will suddenly launch an attack, saying that they are preparing to kill their way out. Now, their leader, Yes Hen, is also moving here. Then, should we completely keep them here, or should we let them live to prevent both sides from suffering losses? Let's discuss this matter. Su He, as the general with the highest military rank and the highest rank, was naturally the best choice to preside over the meeting. As soon as his voice fell, the commanders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. From a psychological point of view, after fighting with the Walla army for so long, of course they wanted to completely keep them here to prevent future troubles. But now was really not a good time. The snow was too thick, and it greatly affected the movement speed of the army. Moreover, the other party's military strength was not ordinary, and their combat strength was quite strong. If they were to fight head-on, not to mention that they might not be able to keep their lives, their losses would definitely not be small. Yang Chendong had already sent out a notice to the entire army. After this battle, they had to take a break. While the army rested and replenished, the migration of the civilians also had to be carried out. They would only attack the Ili region after the snow melted in spring. And if everyone suffered heavy losses now, it would delay the important matters after spring. What should they do? Among the commanders, there were very quickly two opinions. Some people said that they should use this opportunity to completely eliminate Yes Hen. This was a great enemy that the 5-star army rarely faced. If they were eliminated, the 5-star army would no longer have any opponents in this grassland. From a long-term perspective, this was appropriate. Chapter 1271. There were also some people who said that there was no winner in a head-on clash. If they really fought with the Walla army this time and both sides suffered losses, or even greatly damaged their vitality, then when spring came, how would they attack the inner region? How would they accomplish their goals? It was not worth it to give up a large piece of land for Yes Hen, who was like a stray dog. Both opinions had their own supporters, and both had their own reasons. When Su He gathered all the opinions, he was in a dilemma. In the end, his gaze fell on Bai Shuang. After this battle, this person would take up the position of commander. He was in existence on the same level as him, so it was not shameful to listen to his opinion. Of course, Su He knew whether or not he was using Bai Shuang's name in private. This person was Yang Chendong's student. Even if his decision was wrong, Yang Chendong would not blame him too heavily. Su He did not have to be careful. As Xianxia's territory grew larger and larger, the 5-star army became more and more powerful, and Yang Chendong's position became more and more noble. Anyone who faced him had to be careful. This was the aura of a superior. Bai Shuang did not think too much about it. Perhaps it was because of his status that he did not need to worry about these things. He had other thoughts in his mind. Even if Su He did not ask him, he would have said it himself. He took this opportunity to say, "This general has a few opinions. Right now, the war has just begun, and no one can predict what will happen next. Why don't we prepare for both sides?" Prepare for both sides? Hearing Bai Shuang's words, everyone looked at him with confusion. Yes, prepare for both sides. Bai Shuang said with certainty. First, we naturally plan to destroy the Walla's main force, or even capture or kill Yes Hen. We still have to do the necessary charge and support. The foreign race's first army will still be blocked. If we can heavily injure them and find an opportunity, we will move out with our entire army and crush them. Secondly, if there's no turning back, and the Walla army's will to fight to the death is obvious, and they've always held the initiative on the battlefield, then we should give up on fighting them head-on, and weaken the enemy's strength as much as possible without losing our own strength. If it's really impossible, then we should just let them leave. The future is long. If we can beat them away today, then we can defeat them in the future and wipe them all out. Two different opinions were put forward at once. Their considerations were taken into consideration by the officers. After everyone heard it, they all nodded in agreement. There were even some people who thought in their hearts, as expected of Wu Nanking's student, he has a very thorough understanding of the 4 words discretion. Su He, who was sitting at the head of the table, also nodded in agreement. Previously, he thought that Bai Shuang was directly promoted to commander because he was Yang Chendong's student. Now, it seemed that this opinion needed to be changed. This person was indeed very capable, and he might be able to take up the position of commander. Bai Shuang's opinion received everyone's agreement. Then, this opinion was reported to Yang Chendong. Soon, a telegram was sent back to deal with this matter. Not long after, the foreign race's first army also received the telegram. Su Ku, who was going to be demoted after the war, after seeing the telegram, he only thought for a moment before saying to his 4 division commanders, "Everything will be done according to the telegram. We will use all our strength to stop them. If we can't catch them, then let them pass by us." "No, Commander." The 301st Division Commander, Tu Hai, immediately objected. "Commander, this is an opportunity for the foreign race's first army. If we can stop the Walla army and even capture their leader, Yes Hen, it will definitely be a great achievement. Maybe you won't have to leave." In order to achieve this goal, even if we have to sacrifice our entire army, it will be worth it. That's right, military commander. The other 3 division commanders also expressed the same opinion. Suka's army was obviously very capable. At least, he quickly won the support of his 4 division commanders. Looking at the expectant gazes of the 4, Suka's heart was very moved. However, he wasn't moved. He knew that it was his negligence and arrogance that caused the army to lose the opportunity to fight. And now, it was time to make up for his mistakes. If he ignored all the soldiers of the foreign race's first army for his own selfish reasons, even if he could stop Yes-hen in the end, it would still be a failure. He couldn't destroy the entire foreign race's first army for his own selfish reasons. Suka's heart was firm. Okay, I'm still the commander. Carry out my orders. The commander's authority was inviolable. Since Suku had said so, Tu Hai and the others had no choice but to carry out his orders. However, they had already thought it through. They would do their best to stop the Walla army from breaking out. If there was a chance, even if both sides suffered losses, they would still try to stop the enemy. The Walla cavalry's charge was still ongoing. Although the war horses couldn't display their usual speed due to the snow, and the pressure from the arrows increased, Beaumur didn't have any intention of stopping. He knew that if they couldn't break out today, once the 5-star army's 30,000 cavalry arrived tomorrow, it would be even more difficult to retreat. There are still 4 hours before the sky turns dark. The leader will also join us. At that time, we must kill our way out. For this, we must do it no matter the cost. He repeated the importance of this battle to the deputy general beside him. Then, as if he had just remembered something, he asked, "General, how is the situation on the other side?" "General, the news from there is that everything is fine. The 5-star army's cavalry didn't have enough momentum. It seems like they are very afraid of death." When the deputy general answered this question, there was a trace of disdain in the corner of his mouth. Beaumur could see that this person was looking down on the 5-star army. His expression changed for no reason. "What do you know? The 5-star army isn't afraid of death. They just don't want to pay a huge price. I even suspect that they have already seen through our goal." "What? That can't be right." The deputy general had a look of disbelief. "There is nothing impossible about it. I have long heard that the 5-star army has a type of metal that can achieve the purpose of rapid communication. In other words, the news of the leader meeting us is very likely to be known to them. Our abnormal attack must have aroused their suspicions," Beaumur said with a heavy expression. When he first heard about this matter, he still had a look of disbelief. However, the 5-star army's reaction speed on the battlefield had already proven this point. After saying this, Beaumur didn't look at the deputy general who was so shocked that his mouth was agape. Instead, he looked back at the map in front of him. He was thinking about whether there were any loopholes in their next move. On the other hand, the attacks of the new army on the west side were indeed not that fierce. With such a thick layer of snow, once they started charging, they would definitely not be able to increase their speed. This allowed the archers, who were on the defensive, to have more space to display their skills. Knowing that it was dangerous and still having the soldiers charge, no general with brains would do such a thing. However, this didn't mean that they wouldn't do anything. It was inevitable for soldiers to be sacrificed on the battlefield, but the most important thing was how to make the most of their value. If they couldn't make enough difference, Su He Bai Shuang, and the others couldn't accept such a way of dying. "I think we should wait until nighttime. Once the first Walla cavalry can't hold on any longer, the Walla army will have to charge out from there. At that time, the 50,000 Walla cavalry will definitely retreat. While they are retreating, we will launch an all-out attack. At that time, even if Yes-hen and the others can escape, we still have to make them stay. No matter what, we have to tear off a piece of meat from them." In the tent, the one who spoke was Bai Shuang. Seeing that he was going to become the commander of an army after the battle, he didn't dare to underestimate his words. "Of course, whether or not we can make these 50,000 soldiers stay will ultimately depend on whether or not the first army can seal their pockets. Commander Su, I'll need you to communicate with them about this matter." After Bai Shuang finished explaining the general military plan, he patched up the last loophole, but this time, he looked at Commander Su He. Although Bai Shuang could communicate with the first army of the alien race directly with his current status, Because of what happened before, he was likely to take up a new position. It would not be good for him to jump out at this time and give orders. It would give people the impression that he was exercising his authority before he took up the position. After thinking about it, Su He, as the army commander, was more suitable. Su He understood Bai Shuang's intentions and knew that this was for the sake of the big picture. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll use the radio to contact Senior Colonel Su Ku." He used to address Su Ku as Commander Su, but now that things had changed, it wasn't appropriate to address him as commander, especially in front of Bai Shuang. Instead, it was more appropriate to address him by his rank. Soon, Su He's telegram was sent to the headquarters of the First Army. Su Ke didn't reply immediately after reading the telegram. He was weighing the pros and cons in his mind. However, Tu Hai, the commander of the 301st Regiment, who was beside him, immediately tossed it aside after reading the telegram. With a displeased expression he said, "We are all military units. What right do you have to order us around?" They didn't think of a way to launch an attack and rendezvous with us to launch a pincer attack. Instead, they wanted us to open up a path and let the enemy's general go just so they could finish off the 50,000 cavalrymen who were left behind to block the road. We can't agree to this kind of thinking. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.